Right, Chair.
Okay, so I just want to provide a brief overview of today's business. So the committee will consider 2 statutory rules subject to assembly procedure. We're going to receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on the main estimates 2025-26 and the June monitoring round, and we're going to receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on active travel, which is the progress review for 24-25 and future plans. So sorry I missed that. I declare the meeting open and in public session, so we're good. And I want to welcome into the public gallery today. We have a few work experience students. We have Rory, Maddie, Molly and Mackenzie. You're very welcome to the Infrastructure Committee today. We hope that you are learning lots with your MLAs that you are with. Just a reminder that we would ask to keep your mobile phones muted. 3G, 4G, 5G shouldn't be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken of the meeting. So if members are content, we'll proceed through the agenda as follows. Content, yeah? Yep. Apologies, we don't have any. We've Nicola and Mark joining us online today. Declarations of interest. Remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises during the meeting. So does any members have any interest that they wish to declare? No? Okay. Chairperson's business. Yesterday I attended the Fiscal Council launch of their paper on the sustainability of funding for Northern Ireland Water. Peter and Andrew were also there at that. It was a very useful briefing. To be honest, there's no big surprises in terms of what the Fiscal Council were saying, and really, you know, they were pointing towards domestic charging for water. That's what I felt. Maybe Andrew or Peter, that was maybe your takeaway from the event as well.
My main takeaway was really the cost of inaction, the cost of not doing anything. That was my takeaway from it. There's no silver bullet answer to all of this. I think Sir Robert said that himself multiple times. But not doing something is causing more issues. I'm always talking about human waste in the roads, human waste in the loch, the Belfast, living with water, Belfast being paused or stalled. I mean, these are the ramifications of not doing anything. So that was my main takeaway.
Yeah. So it was an interesting briefing. We will have the Fiscal Council coming up to the committee next week. So you will see the paper in full because it will be included in our packs, and you can take a good read at it before they come up to the committee. Okay, so item 4 is draft minutes. So draft minutes of the proceeding of the meeting on the 4th of June. So there was just one slight amendment, if you don't mind. It's just in relation to my declaration of interest. Not that I want to fire everything on to Erskines, but I do want to make it clear that the declaration of interest relates to my husband's family in terms of the A5. So if you're content just to that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting, taking into account that change, if you are happy.
Good.
Okay, I'll sign the minutes now. Great, thank you. And then you'll see on your table pack at page 3, there's draft minutes of the proceedings from the concurrent meeting between Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs and our own committee, which is Committee for Infrastructure, on the 3rd of June 2025. So I'm just seeking agreement that members are content the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the concurrent meeting on the 3rd of June 2025. And I'll sign those minutes at an appropriate time whenever we get those content. Yeah. Item 5 is matters arising. So does anybody have any matters arising from the previous meeting? No? Okay. Okay, item 6 is correspondence. You'll see at page 21 the correspondence memo. At page 25 there's correspondence from the Minister for Infrastructure regarding the introduction of the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Bill. And I'm just drawing to your attention that there's an advanced copy of the bill, and there's some information which has been provided to us in confidence because the bill has not been formally introduced. So I'm just seeking agreement in that context that we forward a copy of the correspondence, the draft bill and the EFM to the Assembly's Research and Information Service to inform any relevant research papers and to seek a list of suggested stakeholders that the committee might want to engage with when we're considering our call for evidence. Are you content with that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. At page 51, you'll see correspondence from the Department for Infrastructure providing a copy of the terms of reference for the review of Class C taxi licensing. So I'm just seeking agreement that we note this at this stage and then schedule an evidence session in the forward work programme following the conclusion of the consultation analysis and report. This is something that the committee has been, I think, pretty pivotal in terms of pushing some of this. So if you're content with that, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, page 98. There's correspondence from the Committee for Finance highlighting an invitation to the launch of the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council's report on sustainability of funding for Northern Ireland Water. So we do obviously have indicated that a few of the members were at the meeting yesterday and we're scheduled for the oral evidence next week. At page 100, you'll see correspondence from the Public Accounts Committee in relation to DVA procurement and public procurement in general. So I'm seeking agreement that we write to the department to ask what changes have been made to procurement process in response to these reports. So are you content with that?
Content, sure. Okay,
thank you. Is there any other items of correspondence that anybody wants to raise anything about? Keith?
Yeah, Chair, I would like to go back to 49 and 50. Regarding these fixed penalty notices to be issued for misuse of school safety lighting.
Yeah.
It'd be good to know, because you can read that, obviously, it indicates that if an individual driving a bus isn't putting on the proper warning light, that they are effectively responsible. But I suppose the questions I have, if they communicated with EA and TransLink about this, that they're going to up their game on this, and I assume all EA buses have it, but does all TransLink buses have it? And if a TransLink bus doesn't have it, is that the responsibility of the driver not having it? Because you know, a bus can be a public bus and a school bus at the same time. So I appreciate this is all developing from school safety and bus safety, but there's a few questions just that I would like based on coming out of that.
No, I think that's fair enough. I think those are fair enough.
It's just to highlight the fact that if they're going to, start going after these drivers in a more proactive way, which is fair enough, have the sort of said late guys, make sure you're doing this correctly.
Yeah. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, it's more just of a comment. I thought that whenever I read this as well, like a DVA enforcement, is that one of the the white cars that you see sitting around with the cameras? Is that what they are? Like who are the DVA enforcement people? Are they going to be proactively challenging people in real time, or is it going to be sending letters to schools?
You're going to have to tactically drive behind the bus, because if the bus goes to pull it and stop and it doesn't show the flashing sign.
You're talking split seconds there in terms
Yes.
of how you catch someone. I don't understand how that enforcement aspect's going to work.
Okay, so we'll question some of those points.
Yeah,
Happy enough with
You
that?
spoke to EA and I spoke to TransLink, and is the driver responsible then for driving a public service bus with school children on it, without it on it? Is he or she actually responsible, the driver?
And how DVA will police that effectively?
Yeah.
Okay, content? Any other items of correspondence? No. Okay, so I'm just seeking agreement then that you're content to note the remaining correspondence is contained in the correspondence memo in the meeting pack. Content, yeah. Okay, we'll move on now to item 7, which is the SR 2025-85 Kensington Avenue Banbridge Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2025. At pages 109 to 116, you'll see documents in relation to the statutory rule. At page 116, you'll see the 41st report of the examiner for statutory rules. The rule is the purpose of the rule is to abandon 165 square metres of adopted verge to the rear of number 44 and 46 Castlewellan Road, Banbridge. So the committee considered the proposal for the statutory rule at its meeting on the 30th of April 2025 and was content with the proposal. The examiner for statutory rules has reported on the rule and has no comment to make. So are members content with the statutory rule?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the motion is that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2025-85 Kensington Avenue, Banbridge, Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2025 and has no objection to the rule. Item 8 is SR 2025-86, the Rathenraw Industrial Estate Antrim Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2025. Pages 109 to 116 is documents relating to the statutory rule. The purpose of the rule is to abandon an area of 1,453 square metres of turning head located between Unit 11D Rathenraw Industrial Estate and 15 Rathenraw Industrial Estate Antrim, commencing at a point 22 metres east of Unit 8 Rathenraw Industrial Estate and continuing for a distance of 60.15 metres after completion of such works as the Department considers necessary to provide alternative facilities. So the committee considered the proposal for the statutory rule at its meeting on the 30th of April 2025 and was content with the proposal. The examiner of statutory rules has reported on the rule and has no comment to make. So are members content with the statutory rule? Okay, so the motion is that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2025-86, the Rathenraw Industrial Estate Antrim Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2025 and has no objection to the rule. Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to our oral evidence. This is the main estimates that we're starting with. So you'll see the main estimates are for 2025-26. At page 132, you'll see Department for Infrastructure 2025-26 main estimates memorandum. At page 141, you'll see Department for Infrastructure main estimates 25-26 extract. Tabled in your table pack, you'll see page 9, the clerk's memo. Tabled at page 12 is DFI's finance presentation slides, 25-26 main estimates, June 25. So, welcome to the committee today. Susan Anderson, Director of Finance, Department for Infrastructure, Declan McGeown, Deputy Secretary for Water and Departmental Delivery, Colin Woods, Deputy Secretary for Transport, Roads and Asset Management, and Judith Andrews, Acting Deputy Secretary for Climate Planning and Public Transport. You're very welcome to the committee today. Obviously, the committee, as you know, we're very keen to look at budgets. Budgets are everything that this department does, and we're very capital heavy in terms of infrastructure and what we collectively do for Northern Ireland in terms of infrastructure. So papers were a wee bit late, particularly the June monitoring round papers, which didn't allow us to have proper time. We only got them late yesterday. And I know myself, I feel like I didn't have a proper time to look at these and scrutinise these in the way that I would like to, given how much it impacts upon the business and service delivery of what happens for my constituents and right across Northern Ireland. So if you don't mind, can you give a reason as to why we have late receipts of the papers, and particularly because when you look at the memorandum, that was publicly available, and you know we've seen that publicly available, but it was something that was given to the committee. So just in light of that, and particularly around June month, why that was late, because as a committee we want to ensure that we have effective scrutiny.
Okay, well, perhaps, Chair, I'll begin and apologise. We are really sorry about that. It is a challenging process. While our budget is slightly better this year, it still presents us with challenges, and you'll hear that through the course of the morning. And with that, it is a challenging budget, therefore, to make it stretch across the various budgetary areas. And for that reason, it probably came much too late for you to have a proper consideration. We accept that, and we do apologise. Hopefully through the course of the next 90 minutes or so, we'll be able to elaborate on any points that you need clarification on. But our apologies for that.
Yeah, it's just as a committee we sort of feel that a lot of time was given. You know, we work within the time constraints, obviously, of tabling and the interaction between assembly committees and departments. So we feel that we have entered into it from our part. So just if that could be reflected. But like, as I said to the committee, we want to focus on the main estimates first, and then we'll come to the June monitoring. So if you don't mind, if you would take us through the main estimates, please, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start here. I've got a couple of slides then just to walk through. And as you already said there, you've got the memorandum alongside this as well. So really what the main estimates do is they reflect the Department's 25-26 final budget outcome. And just to state up front, these don't reflect Minister's final opening budget decisions, as those were still subject to the equality consultation that we were working through, which closed then on the 5th of June. However, the equality scenario does form the basis on which the main estimates were prepared. And as the committee will know, really what the estimates are doing here is providing the legislative basis for the department's spending limits based on what was set on the final budget position. So if we look then at our actual spending totals for this year that are set out in the main estimates, the resource DEL figure, probably again you won't be so familiar with that figure, because really what it is made up of is the figure in the equality consultation updated for final budget. Plus in there we also then have the ring-fenced element, which is our depreciation and impairment, those accounting adjustments, and that's just under about 130 million. So that's why the figure is sitting at 767.5 million. As I say, it's made up of the final budget allocation plus then our ring-fenced elements for depreciation and impairment. And the capital figure then, it's a bit more straightforward, so it's a 917, as you'd expect to see. Within the estimates then we also have some further figures which are for our AMI expenditure lines. So those are annually managed expenditure lines, and those are really areas which we can't control particularly well, and they're volatile. So what scores in our resource AMI and our capital AMI are really depreciation and impairment. So that's for our non-trunk road network, where we can't really easily quantify or estimate year on year how much the movement will be. So that's why they score in AMI. And then we move on to the final couple of lines there on that table, which are non-budget lines. And really what's in our resource and capital lines there are the subsidy that we pay over to NI Water in cash terms, netting off then with the dividend that we receive back from NI Water, along with the loan interest that we receive back from NI Water there. So effectively that's the cash movements between ourselves and NI Water at the 366. And those figures then are reflected in the main estimates. Again, if we look at some of the pie charts, and these are as what is actually set out in our estimates memorandum, some of the figures there again will read across quite nicely to what you'll be familiar with in the equality screenings, for example the TransLink figures. However, as I mentioned earlier, this also includes our depreciation and impairment figures. So that's why, for example, on the tram lines, they will look a bit higher, because we've also got depreciation and impairment in there. The same with NI Water, 149 plus another 100 odd million for depreciation in there as well. So that's just showing how we've split the budget in terms of main estimates across the various spending lines, as you'll see on the slide. Moving on then to the capital position, again, pretty similar story here. It aligns quite nicely to the equality scenario. However, in the equality scenario, you picked up that we did overplan in the outset. And what we've done there is, because we cannot use that overplanning in our main estimates figure, we've effectively netted that off various lines across the pie chart here as well. So really what we're showing here is the allocations per the equality screening, and having to net off then the overplanning amount that we factored in as well. So that's a very quick run through in terms of the main estimate memorandum. Happy to take any questions then on the detail of it.
Okay, thank you. I suppose the quality impact assessment, if I start on that, that's just closed, I think, last week. So it's just wondering when the department anticipates that it will be in a position to conclude its consideration of the issues raised in that consultation, and when will the Minister determine then the final allocations resulting from that impact assessment?
Okay, so yes, the quality consultation closed on the 5th of June. We have a number of responses in covering a range of areas, as you'd expect: water, housing, active travel, community transport, public transport, road maintenance and road safety as well. So those are the areas that have been brought to our attention as part of the equality screening. We're currently working our way through those, and we will prepare then a final report for Minister's consideration. And once she's considered that, then we will invite her to take final opening budget decisions. So that should happen within the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so you imagine in 2 weeks or so, is that sort of
That'll
the
be our
aim?
plan to work through, yeah.
And then in terms of the committee, will our views be sought in relation to any final proposed allocations or any decisions that the Minister will make?
We will certainly share the final report with the committee. That would be normal practice. We will share that with yourselves once that's finalised.
Okay. Do you know yet in terms of how many have actually fed into that equality impact assessment? Because I know that the likes of community transport and people like that will be, of course, feeding into that, Section 75 groups particularly as well when it comes to public transport elements.
Yes, we had 27 responses in total. Now, some of those were blank, but that's the number of responses. We're counting everything in there. And as I mentioned earlier on, just a range of areas that were covered in the responses, those kind of general trends.
Okay. There's a lot of pressure on the department. We don't underestimate that. But I suppose there's a lot there in terms of TransLink, road maintenance, you've water, you've a lot going on in terms of climate planning, how we do business. So what pressures have been identified or anticipated under business areas as a result of what you may have at this moment in time?
I suppose primarily we're moving in maybe the June monitoring pressures. Those are the pressures that we've identified and have subsequently bid for those as part of June monitoring. Happy to talk about those now, or?
Well, maybe then we'll leave it until the June monitoring. If those are the main pressures that have been identified and that's the reason then for the June, those pressures then, we'll maybe keep that till then if you're happy enough. I suppose in terms of, I just want to chat about the depreciation, because I did raise this in the chamber and I just want to get some clarity. The committee has written to get some clarity in relation to this, and this is around roads and roads maintenance. And as we know, and the committee is aware, road maintenance also equals road safety as well. So there was 4.2 million underspend. And I'm just wondering why this is. I'm also wondering, does that roll over or does that go back into the Department for Finance's central pot? What way does that work? Just for clarity for the committee as well.
That's Susan. It's purely a technical matter rather than a substantive matter.
As Colin says, this is absolutely an accounting matter. So this is ring-fenced depreciation impairment, so we cannot use that for any other types of expenditure. It isn't cash related, so there's no cash impact here. It is purely the accounting adjustment to reflect how the assets have depreciated over the year. And as I mentioned, it's really difficult to try and estimate that accurately at the start of the year, which is why then we had that underspend coming through as part of provisional outturn. So it's absolutely not funding that we could have used to maintain the roads in any way. It is ring-fenced, non-cash accounting adjustment to reflect how the assets have deteriorated over the year.
Okay, I'm now going to move to the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks, again for coming along. We appreciate your time today. Just in relation to the capital forecasted spend there, particularly the ring fence to 261 million. Just can we get a high-level breakdown potentially on what that's heading towards at this stage?
So a lot of that is roads expenditure.
Yes.
So it's major roads projects, both the A5 and the City Deals projects. So the A5 is the largest single component of it. But then you've got a range of other City Deals projects that we're taking forward. So the Lagan Pedestrian Bridge, the Newry Southern Relief Road, the Cookstown Bypass, the Enniskillen Bypass, and so on. And that's all ring-fenced money because it's either an executive flagship scheme or it's part of the City Deal. So, for example, the A5 number has gone down a bit because we're still waiting a judgment in the legal challenge. We're not able to progress as fast as we would have liked. That money has to go back then because it's ring-fenced. It goes back to DOF for redistribution. It's not something that we can then choose to reallocate, which is why helpfully it's presented in a different part of the pie.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Colin. Appreciate that. So in relation to the city deal expenditure, it is anticipated then that those projects will progress fully and that expenditure will be spent in the 25-26 year.
Yeah, so the projects are all absolutely proceeding.
Yes.
Obviously, depending on exactly when you get through a procurement and into construction is when you actually then need the cash. The executive has made the commitment to fund the deals, so yes, the deals will be funded at whatever point that need arises. It just changes then what we do in this particular year.
Just moving on then to both resource and capital for the transport and for roads and for maintenance. Obviously, I don't need to tell you just how poor condition our roads are in, given the inflationary pressures and the state of the roads depreciating themselves each year. Are you confident? How confident are you that is enough money to stand still in terms of keeping our road network to the standard it needs to be? Because we do know it is in a precarious position, shall we say, in terms of maintenance.
So look, I'll answer that question in two parts because
Please
the
do.
resource and the capital parts are probably a different answer.
Yes, yeah, understand.
So from an essential maintenance perspective, which is resource funded, which is the routine maintenance that you do, it's the defect repair, it's grass cutting, it's verge management, it's all that kind of stuff. We have an increase in resource budget available for that this year, so we've been operating a limited service since 2014. Yeah. We're now in a position where we can't restore normal service, but we are looking to expand upwards from the limited service standard, and we're bringing proposals forward for the Minister's consideration as to what exactly that would look like. So for example, we've had to reduce our gully cleaning frequency, and we're looking to see in areas of known risk, can we increase again up from the minimum of one a year to something more risk-based and more tailored, and some of the extra money will go to that. We also have a new road maintenance strategy that we've been developing, and we hope to fund some activity from that on a network-wide basis in terms of our approach. So from a resource perspective, better than last year, probably still short of the figure of actual need. We're maybe, I would say about 10 million would be my estimate, short of the true need for what the network needs to stand still in that, and to use that kind of language.
Does that 10 million come, would that take us towards a normal service of maintenance?
Yes, it would. So
Okay.
we would take that limited service. So we have a director of engineering memo that gives our staff the instructions for how to deliver at the standard that we can afford, and we would then look to change that, and we will be looking to make changes to those standards during the year anyway, as I say, but to fully restore normal service would take a bit more that we don't yet have, but we are making positive steps towards that.
Okay.
On the capital side, I'm afraid it isn't as positive an answer. You'll see from the slide there that the non-ring fence capital available to the Tram Group is about 120 million. That's 20 to 25 million less than last year because we've had to support the delivery of the schemes, the ring fence schemes. So the budget that the department gets is not entirely on top of its normal requirement. We still have to try and make the best balance available. So structural maintenance in particular, the indicative allocation for structural maintenance is much lower than the need requirement. The need is about 194 million a year, and we're looking at an indicative opening allocation of 68. Now, we've never got 194, so we're not going from that down to 68. Last year the outturn was about 101, 102 million. So that's still a significant drop from last year, and in any case is still significantly below what it would take for the network to stand still in terms of its condition, because we're also picking up now 10 years of limited service.
Yeah.
It costs more to keep a house or a car if it's older and in bad shape to start with, and it's the same is true of the road network. So from a capital perspective, we're probably at about a third of the level approximately of need, but look, we recognise that this money also has to fund all the other things that the executive wants to do, so here we are, and we're trying to manage that as best we can.
And just in relation to then the maintenance, and we might be straying the operational matter, but we heard before about the capacity issues potentially within the private sector to provide the contracts. Are you confident, and has there been engagement with them to make sure that there is the capacity within that workforce and those private contractors to do the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, so the capacity of a marketplace turns like an oil tanker, not a speedboat. Yeah. But yes, look, we think we've got reasonable plans to make good use of that this year. Obviously, the great day that will come when we have multi-year budgets and we can plan on a 3-year basis will improve our ability to do that. But from an essential maintenance perspective, we are obviously the issue of contractor availability, we have the opposite problem in the structural maintenance programme, where at 68 million there is not going to be enough work to sustain the same supplier base. I wouldn't think. Logic would tell you that if you're down 30 million on the year, then there isn't as much work going out from the department, and we know that would be an issue for our contractors. So we're obviously talking to them closely and trying to keep them sighted on where we are in the decision making process. But we would recognise, and the Minister would recognise, that would have a regrettable impact if that's the number that we end up having to go with.
Appreciate that. I've a couple more, Chair, but they may stray into the gin monitoring section again. I'm not sure. Should I ask them and find out?
Yeah, ask them and find out. I had to ask mine to find out.
It was mainly around the estimates and the capital estimates for particularly Northern Ireland Water and for Translink, and obviously we're aware of the pressures they have. I'm just interested to hear the feedback that you've had from them in terms of where they think the main pressures are and how close they go to alleviating their biggest concerns.
So we probably are going to stray into but just to tee it up as a teaser, I guess. So Northern Ireland Water, from our perspective, has sent in an operating plan, and it sets out its needs both in resource and capital. For resource, it says it needs 172 million, for capital 405. The figures, as we'll get to in the course of this discussion, that we're suggesting that we might be allocating, subject to ministerial approval, will fall slightly short of that, and will present a challenge, and that's why you'll see bids to try and address that. So it will present a challenge, particularly on the capital side for Northern Ireland Water, with the range of schemes that have to be delivered. We're looking to see how we can work with them to address that, and look at alternative ways of providing the service. You've heard about the natural approaches, so we're trying to look at things like that.
Yeah.
I can pick up on the Translink thing.
Yes, please, Judith.
Again, challenging capital budget for Translink as well. They would see themselves as being probably about 30 million short around all of that. That said, obviously the focus is on the commitments in terms of capital projects, and there's a degree of ring fence. You asked about ring fenced as well in terms of the remainder works on the Grand Central Station. The public realm works around Weaver Cross, so there's a commitment of 40 million there. They're focusing on replenishing their fleet in terms of buses and also class 4000 trains, and as well there's a number of commitments there around things like signalling, the NIROC project, and also the electronic ticketing, which is coming to a close as well, and that's improving customer service and reducing costs, etc. Health and safety is a big priority, obviously, for Translink, and there's about 37 million devoted to that, in addition to committed spend, so not just committed spend. So that's all about, I suppose, the infrastructure, things like linings of bridges, cleaning culverts, signalling, things like that. It's really, really important in terms of safety piece. So again, working closely with Translink in terms of prioritising what they can spend within the budget envelope that has been allocated to them.
Yeah. That's good to know. I mean, just speaking to Translink and people in the organisation, we're very aware that their fleet is ageing. We're spending more and more and more on maintenance each year to keep the vehicles and the trains on the tracks and on the road. And there are significant pressures obviously coming to bear in terms of that of buying that new fleet. And I'm just concerned that maybe the money isn't there at this stage.
Well, there is. I mean, this year they plan to buy 100 new battery buses, so there is a degree of replenishment. It's maybe not at the speed that they would like, but we're doing what we can.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the environmental piece in there too, in terms of climate piece. So shifting, over to the battery buses and also the hydrogen buses as well. The class 4000 trains, there's a degree of replenishment on those.
Okay.
But as you say, it is an ageing fleet of vehicles as such, and carriages.
We'll maybe touch more about it in a bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you folks for your presentation. Again, just picking up a couple of the points that was mentioned there around the over 10 years of limited service, and I know we've talked about this a number of times in the committee. We do welcome the positive music there, hopefully, on that. But is there any more time frame on the new roads maintenance strategy? I know the Minister has hinted at that a few times, even to myself at question time and so on, and as you say, the impact that over 10 years has had on our roads right across the country is significant, and it will require a lot of investment to bring it up to a safer standard, and So I suppose just keen to tease out any more info on that.
Yeah, so it's very much tied up in the budget question, because what we can afford to change this year in part comes from what we can afford to spend. So what the purpose of the strategy is to look at the approach that we've taken over the last 10 years and to recognise, while it's absolutely the right approach logically, it has left us with some unintended consequences. So, the going past one defect to fix another one and leaving the first one until it gets worse and then fixing it.
Yeah.
And that's not as good value for money. Now, when you're trying to manage a network of the scale that we are, with 26,000 kilometres of road, 6,000 kilometres of footpath, it's difficult sometimes to be precise and to be able to take the best value for money approach. But we recognise the need to move in that direction from where we are at the minute after 10 years of limited service. So what we want to do is, where we intervene, to really improve the quality of the asset, improve the quality of the usability and of the structure and of the quality of the road itself. That might mean that you only intervene in a number of sites, but when you do it really well. And there's a balance to be struck between that and ensuring that the safety is appropriately protected. So the structural maintenance budget, for example, is a component of that, where often the best thing to do is not to patch a footpath, it's to replace it. But how much capital budget you have tells you how realistic it is for that to be your goal. So that's one of the reasons why the Minister hasn't brought forward that strategy at this point, because it is tied up certainly in 25-26 in question of how much money is available for structural maintenance this year.
It will be a priority then?
Yeah, look, the approach is what we want to try and move to, and what the Minister has asked us to think about. I've likened it to a bit like we're swinging a pendulum away from a purely reactive defect led to something that includes a greater focus on overall quality and underlying quality. You can do that for a while. Yeah. Depending on how many defects you have, you might have to swing it back again, but we're trying to find the room to manoeuvre.
Yeah,
and
I think the increase in claims per vehicle and personal injury as well as reflected on over that.
That is a factor, absolutely. Now, the volume of claims, the amount of money it would take to remove the risk of most, if not all, claims is astronomical. So you're never necessarily, it's not a straight trade-off between one and the other, but it's one of the indicators we use to tell us is our approach the optimal approach, and do we need to think about how we might do this differently? And that's the space that we've been thinking in over the last while.
Yeah, okay, just one other quick point on the maybe fraying into later on business, but the terms of the Living with Water Belfast programme, will these estimates have any impact, negative or positively, on that? Do you foresee?
Remains to be seen. So as you know, the Living with Water programme in and of itself, the title of it, that programme, we had to look at that, review it, etc., because of the huge rise in costs, 50% rise in costs. So what we have done is, following the review, we've got to a point where they'll be taken forward the schemes as business as usual, and therefore Northern Ireland Water have already developed outline business cases for the areas that need to be developed. It'll be for them then, within the envelope of funding that we allocate them, to decide whether or not they feature as the higher priorities or whether there are other priorities that take centre stage, and therefore that'll be the decision that they'll need to make about how they allocate their funding towards Belfast and other parts of the region.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mark is online and was indicating. Sorry, Mark, we just can't hear you.
Sorry,
there we
thank
go.
you, Chair, and thanks to the team for coming along with us. There's quite a lot on it. We'd love to see more on it, of course, and we're looking at how, I suppose, the pie's cut, and we'd all like to see a bigger pie. Just one wee point, it might be just a stylistic thing, but in terms of the pie charts that we've been given, is there a reason why the same key or colour code isn't applied to the resource and capital? It just might be easier in some respects. For example, in resource, like TransLink is represented by red, yet in the capital, is it Northern Ireland? Yeah, Northern Ireland Water is in red. I just think it would be easier for everyone, not just us, but probably yourselves as well, if there was consistency in terms of like that key. Deborah had asked there about the depreciation and got a bit of clarity on it, and that sort of 4 million differential. How is the estimate carried out each year? Is there a fixed formula or equation to do that? And is it lower because I suppose that book capital value of the road's asset was lower than anticipated, or is there? I'm just wondering what the reason for that is. Basically, I appreciate it's a technical accounting mechanism and it's not money coming out of somewhere else, but I'm just wondering what way that's computed.
Yeah, so there's a complicated formula behind all of this, and it's really after the year end that is worked through, and we get the actual value of the network, which lets us determine how much the road has depreciated in year. The specific roads that are in question here are our trunk road network, which are really motorways and main roads. So there's different types of valuations that's applied to different types of roads as well. But when we estimate it at the start of the year, because we don't have the indices, etc., that we would need to estimate it accurately, we have to just apply a number of assumptions, and we would look at historic trends as well whenever we're doing that at the outset. So it's something really that it is difficult to try and forecast accurately, but we do it as best we can with the information that we have available to us at the time when we are forecasting, and that's at main estimate stage. And then we do have an opportunity to update that again at spring supplementary estimates, but again, we really don't know until after the year end, until we've got the actual valuations through.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And we're getting the active travel team, they're in with us later this morning, or it might be this afternoon. I was just wondering, in terms of active travel and that legal obligation to spend 10% of the transport budget on active travel, I wonder would there be any merit in giving it its own heading, if you like, and does that come as 10% out of, tram and TransLink?
Yeah, so the things that we count as transport budget include a broad range of things, and you're right, it's primarily public transport and then tram activity. I mean, there might be value in using it as a category, but it is quite diffused throughout a lot of different budget lines. So, anything we do that supports cycling, walking, and wheeling, it includes things like structural maintenance and a component of that when that's used to replace footpaths. It includes a portion of our street lighting cost, which is primarily for the benefit of pedestrians. So it would be quite an exercise. It might be a useful thing to do from an analysis point of view, and I'm sure the team that are coming in would be happy to discuss that further in terms of how to help everybody see and make it visible. Whether it's as useful for us when it comes to budget management, it probably isn't, to be honest. But it's something that we could think about in terms of making it clear for interested parties.
Just because in terms of resource, it's 10% of about 50% of the overall picture, which is not insignificant by any means. On the TransLink stuff that has been touched on, I think, did you say there's worth 30 million short of what they'd like for, or say they need, and I don't doubt that they do, for capital. Where is TransLink in terms of, in order to meet any shortfall? They have the capital one that we've heard about, but in resource, will they have any option? Well, I know there's in-year monitoring bids where they'll be competing with roads maintenance and Northern Ireland Water and everything else from every other department. Have they any other option then other than the increased fares?
Decision to increase fares kind of rests with the minister. What they have done in terms of looking at the resource side of things is they have looked at their income for this year, and overall they're expecting to increase income by about 16 million, and that is largely due to their fares, more through the shift in passenger numbers. Last year, 24-25, they had about 81 million passenger journeys, and they've set themselves, an ambitious target for 25-26 to increase that by just over 8%. And I suppose they are seeing a trend in terms of the uptick, particularly post-COVID as well. They're back beyond the pre-COVID kind of levels of passenger journeys. So we have things like the enterprise entry in, and so there's been a doubling of passenger numbers on that, for example. As well, there's a number of big events this year around things, say like the Open, and there's a number of different festivals, etc. And the other thing as well is that this year we don't have any blockades. Last year we did, which, around the Grand Central Station, so that would have had some impact on passenger numbers. So their revenue kind of growth around that is largely linked around the passenger journeys and actually getting people onto public transport. And again, there's the environmental benefit of doing that as well.
Yeah, and then finally, Chair, Stephen and others have mentioned there on the road maintenance piece of things. Welcome work on the strategy of what it entails. It's something I've been calling for a long time. It doesn't necessarily mean getting more money. We have to also look at how money is being spent. I wonder if anything's been identified at this stage where I suppose things could be done more efficiently and more effectively. But in terms of the claims that Stephen was talking about, is that then reflected in the contingent liability, or is that going up every year as well?
The amount of money that we are having to allocate to road compensation claims is going up, yes. From memory, it's somewhere around 9 or 10 million typically is what we would expect at the minute, and that is up. Now, there's lots of reasons why it's up. One of those is the deterioration of the average condition of the network, but there have also been changes in the law in terms of how personal injury compensation is calculated and so on, which has had a significant impact and probably has had more of the impact than the road condition in terms of the impact on claim volumes and claim amounts. So it's a complicated basket, but yes, typically a road that's in better condition will have fewer safety defects and therefore fewer safety incidents and therefore fewer claims. But it's the scale of it makes it hard to be precise in terms of exactly what cause and effect you're seeing.
And is that captured in contingent liability in the estimates or under the roads budget, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what else, I suppose, does contingent liability cover? Is that, I suppose, claims for vesting of land or what?
Yeah, so it'll be a mixture of both. So we will have a budget for those claims that we think are likely to settle, and that's what Colin mentioned there, about 9 million, so that will be factored into the budget. However, we will also have then some contingent liabilities, so those are the claims that have not yet settled, where there's a degree of uncertainty as to whether or not we will be paying something out, and that's why it's classified as a contingent liability. And really it is, the majority of it is public and employers liability, and then a small amount then for contractor claims as well. But there's two sort of elements to it, and really it depends how sure we are about whether or not we have to pay something out or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Keith?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for coming along and the information provided. I want to just follow on Mark's point about active travel. It's maybe for you, Colin, possibly the question. Broadly, I presume that's capital. Is that broadly capital active travel?
Both.
So
yes, most of the spend would be capital.
So if you look at that capital figure of tram of 118 and the magic number is 10%, what would you expect that to be this year? What are you thinking you're going to spend? I know the magic number is 10%. Yeah. What do you think you're going to spend?
So in terms of active travel budget lines, from memory, there's about 20 million in the indicative allocation towards those.
Out of that figure?
Out of that figure, yes. And there would be additional money then within structural maintenance and within a few other lines. Some of the major projects that are ring-fenced are also active travel spend. So, for example, the Lagan pedestrian and cycle bridge to link the gasworks in Ormeau Park in Belfast would count towards the active travel spend target. So it's made up of a number of different things, but in dedicated active travel lines that would fund the Belfast cycling network, our greenways and other dedicated activity, there's about 20 million out of that 118.
What do you see that as in percentage terms?
So we would estimate,
I appreciate I'm going very specific, but
so I don't have the detail, but from memory, and the team will have the detail that are coming in after us.
Fair enough.
We're currently spending in and around 5 or 6% of the transport budget on active travel, and the law obliges us to grow that to 10%.
So if you're spending 5 or 6%, and I'm not anti-footpath, but I do see footpaths being built to nowhere, and the roads that we're on, we don't have money to fix them. So how do we balance that?
Well,
and me and you've had this conversation before, but I'm not going to get to the roads and the footpaths to nowhere, but we're building footpaths till nowhere, and our roads are in bad condition. You said it yourself, the deterioration of the network is the worst it's been. How are we going to square that circle?
So, look, to some extent, as civil servants, we will simply do what the law instructs us to do. So, the law requires us to spend 10% of the transport budget, and we're not debating that in our heads. We're trying to figure out how to give good effect to that. And when we do that, we obviously want it to be as good value for money as we can get it. That's one of our other obligations as well. So, I'm very confident that the programmes of work that the team are bringing forward through our active travel team at the minute, we've set a strategy over the last year and a half, 2 years of growing our capacity to spend that money well, because we can't just turn on a tap and be sure that it would all be worth it. You would end up just throwing money out on things that we don't want, and we don't want to use the money in that way. The quality of schemes that we are bringing forward is very high. I'm very comfortable that that money will be well spent in order to grow to that 10% target. And we shouldn't be seeing footpaths to nowhere. Now, at times there can be reasons why we're trying to link a part of a network to another part, and if you don't have the money to do the whole thing, it's still valuable to begin and start to create those links. But the active travel delivery plan sets out a much more strategic look at how we would do that and how we would choose which schemes to invest in.
Okay, NI Water, see this pie chart, obviously for capital and resource NI Water. If I looked at this pie chart last year, what's NI Water up for capital? Have they get any increase broadly?
Well, it'll depend on decisions, isn't it?
Yeah, so again, it's very similar in terms of last year's outturn, and again, that includes both the general allocation and the RRI borrowing in that figure as well.
Similar, there's not a dramatic change in it. Okay, and then I want to touch fine. I don't want to drill into too deep on gully cleaning. You're doing gully cleaning, you talked about Colin less. Are you happy with gully cleaning? And I'm conscious this is finance, so I don't want to drill into it, but if you don't do gully cleaning, your pipes is going to be blocked, and gully cleaning is sucking out the pot, but they're not sucking out the pipe, so doing it less is not as effective.
Yes, I agree with that.
So how do you square that circle with respect to, because a lot of localised flooding I find comes from gully emptying, not gully emptying. So how do you square that circle, and is anybody policing the gully emptying, as in monitoring that the work has been done? So, and apologise for heading into the points of that. I'm going to leave it at that then, sure.
I'll try to answer those points quickly.
He's taking you up the gully, Colin, taking it very easy.
On monitoring, yes. So our staff monitor the delivery of the gully cleansing programme and understand what has been done and what hasn't been done. It goes back to that question of, if you've only got so much money, how are you going to spend it? That's the challenge, not how to make sure all the gullies are operating at their best. That's not the question that we need to answer. It's, we have so much money to spend on maintenance, how will we spend it? And in that context, a minimum standard of once a year is deemed the minimum acceptable standard. And unfortunately, that is where we have found ourselves with limited service, is looking for the minimum acceptable standard. The maintenance strategy that I talked about, one of the things that we hope to bring forward in that is a road resilience plan that looks at the resilience of the network and its ability to cope with extreme weather events and flooding and all the rest of it. And what I would expect to see that do over time is shift our activity around from a blanket approach into a more tailored risk-based approach, which takes into account areas of known risk. Now, I'm not going to say that we don't do that already. I know we do. For example, when there's a weather warning, our staff will go to areas of known flooding and give the gullies a blast to try and prepare for the storm. But the effectiveness of that is limited when it's in that kind of way, and that's where we get to. It is one of the things where, while we can't go from limited service to normal service in one jump, we are looking to step up the value chain, if I can describe it like that, and take a more tailored approach to gully cleaning, amongst other things.
Finally, if you're going to step up, give me that in percentage terms. So if you're at this today and 100% is perfect, what step are you taking?
Small steps within the money that's available. I couldn't
You're
give
talking
you a
10, 20%. You know what? Is people going to see this out there? People see their street flooded. They see the pothole in the road. They don't see pie charts.
So I would expect that the impact would be seen. Now, it's the absence of something, so it is harder to spot the absence of flooding than to spot the flooding. It doesn't catch the eye in the same way, but the whole point is that we would have fewer sites of localised flooding. So I would hope that people will definitely see the benefit of that over time.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
I never thought I'd see the day that Keith would actually take my active travel question. So I'll try to.
Different reasons, I imagine.
Go
over that side of the room there, Pete. There's a spare seat over there for you.
I'll try to couple this together. I suppose in the active travel briefing that we've had in writing, it is about. They've said that over the last 3 years, roughly 45 to 50 million has been spent in terms of active travel overall. So it was just to concur with what Mark was saying. You know, we've got figures there for Waterways Ireland, 2.7 million. If it's roughly 15 to 20 million being spent, I see merit in actually displaying what we're spending on active travel. And you mentioned, Colin, in your comments that you think we're getting to the right place in terms of that 10%. I think they've said it's roughly 5 to 6%, as you were saying. But in terms of, for example, as a Belfast MLA, the active travel delivery plan, I think it is, a lot of those schemes haven't progressed that much since it was actually developed. So do you think that we're getting a decent return for investment to actually deliver a greater uptake than the 1% of journeys that currently take place via bicycle? Do you think that the money that we're putting in, the schemes that are in place, are actually being delivered upon to increase the amount of people making use of active travel?
So the short answer is yes, but you would expect me to say that. I appreciate. So, so look, from conception to delivery of an active travel scheme takes about the same amount of time as a small major road scheme. It's a complicated exercise when there's land and legislation and all the rest involved. So what we focused on, the strategy that I described a few minutes ago, was making sure that we could in fact sensibly grow our delivery, and we've really invested in our capacity to put out good quality active travel schemes. And I know that the pace of progress over the last 10 years has been disappointing, and the department would acknowledge that. And look, we could debate why that was, but for now what we're saying is we have successfully, we think, created that pipeline that can sensibly spend that extra funding in a value for money way, and all of that is aimed at the goal of increasing the number of journeys that are done by active travel means. Absolutely. So yes, I think we would expect to see that would have a positive impact.
Okay, thank you. Mark was indicating again, so I just want to check, Mark.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for bringing me back. And it was just to be supplementary to Keith, so on the gullies and the answer to that in terms of how, I suppose, I think you'd say, as Colin, you monitor what has been done. I think, is it not the case that you monitor where has been visited as opposed to what has been done? Because we know for various reasons, be it parking, cars parked over gratings and what have you, that even when crews come to areas they can't do somewhere, but then they just move on to the next place, which is no fault of theirs. They can't hang around all day waiting for a car to move. It's also actually on rural roads as well, where you'll see, and it's evident even the on-train day, that there are gullies that haven't been cleaned out in years.
Yeah, so
and I would hope the strategy will find a way of capturing that.
Yes, so as I say, one of the things that we recognise the need to do is to have that better intelligence around areas of known flood risk and ensure that we adapt our approach and we don't just take up approach. And you're right, certainly when a crew goes out and can't clean a gully, we don't then ignore that, but it doesn't mean that we can just go the next day, because we're trying to cover 26,000 kilometres, and so it can take a while then for that second visit to occur.
Okay, Cahill, you were looking in.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your answers so far. I just want to ask, because I'm trying to recollect this, see the NAW stuff, and Keith had asked the question, it's similar to what it was last year. Is that in line with the PC21? Remember you said with this conversation before where they had lined out their 6-year programme, so they needed so much, year 1, year 2, and then it increased. Is that similar? I'm not asking about what they needed, or it's in line with. Is that still in line with the overall PC21 programme? You know what I mean? Like I said, that's what they're allocated. So I'm not arguing they should have been allocated more. What I'm saying is, we said before that year 1, year 2, year 3 would set off at a certain level. Is that still in line with that, or is that ish?
So stop me if this is too long an answer, Cathal, but so when we had the price control determination, the first 3 years of it, as you know, were fully funded, and indeed we exceeded that. As we got into year 4, there started to be a gap emerging between what we could afford and what was doable. So you've heard the magic figure on capital of 321 as an indicative planning allocation, but our minister is very keen that funding is targeted towards water in as much as possible to do that. So while we had the 321 figure as an indicative figure this time last year for Northern Ireland Water looking into this year, that was a big gap from the 537, I think it is, that the utility regulator had said at that point. Northern Ireland Water feel that they could deliver around 405 million this year. Our minister has already increased that 321 figure to an indicative allocation of 350. So she's taken up by 10% already, and is working hard, as you'll hear later on, to close that gap. So in short, the gap is still there between what we're allocating and what the utility regulator says, but the gap between what Northern Ireland Water think they can deliver and what we're given is much smaller. Does that make sense?
No, obviously, and that's why.
Cathal, if you don't mind, just to be completely clear on that, because I think it's a valid point. So just to be clear, yes or no in terms of, is it in line with PC21 then, what we are allocating from the department?
Short answer is no.
Yeah.
No, but that's not the question I was asking. You got to understand, when we asked the question, it was a case of the first 3 years there was a certain amount of money, and then as the capacity built, the infrastructure built, then the next 3 years would be. That's the question I'm asking. Not as whether they got the exact money or not. It's two separate issues. But you've answered the question in terms of what the minister's trying to do.
Okay.
But that's the only point I was asking. It's nothing to do with it. So a little bit clear, Chair, what question was asking. But in my recollection of the 6-year programme, the first 3 years was a certain element we were trying to target. Then the next 3 years the capacity grew in terms of.
It was always expected the costs would rise.
Exactly, would rise. Exactly, that's the question. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
But I think it's just important that we get
Oh, no,
clarity in
100%.
relation to all of
No,
these issues. I do want to touch on NI Water and ask, obviously we're waiting with bated breath in terms of the forensic accountant and what might come out of that. So I'm just wondering what considerations may have been given towards that. Not preempting what may come from the forensic accountant, but it is to do with NI Water's funding. So has there been any consideration given to, the forensic accountant may come back and say NI Water needs X, or there may need to be reductions there. So what considerations are taking place at the minute in relation to that?
So, Chair, maybe just to clarify for everyone, so as you know, it's an independent report being carried out by PwC. It's looking at how decisions are made in the allocation of the budget that once it's given to Northern Ireland Water, it will be, I suspect the final report would be silent on what they need. It will be more a case of what decisions it could potentially have made last year, the financial year that just ended, that could help inform going into this year. So it would be more a case of the decision-making process rather than how much they would need or what model. It would be silent on both. Okay, and could you give also like an overview of the planned capital projects based upon the allocations that are in the memorandum? Is there brief sort of overview of what planned capital projects you have, because I'm also looking at what's not there too.
So look, I'm happy to quickly summarise from a tram perspective, certainly, and obviously the tram budget is the one that the department makes the decision on the projects. Obviously with arm's length bodies, they make the decisions on the projects ultimately, unless it's ring fenced. So look, from a tram perspective, as I said, the major roads projects include the A5 as an executive flagship. There is some still cost going out on the A6 because that project has not come to a commercial conclusion, even though the road is open. Then we have the city deal projects, so Belfast Rapid Transit Phase 2, the Lagan Bridge, the Newry Southern Relief Road, the Enniskillen Bypass, and then we're starting to spend some money on the Northwest City Deal, the Strabane Footbridge and the Derry Riverfront project. We also then have a range of normal spend, so it's the structural maintenance, active travel, bridge maintenance and so on that we would do routinely, and that's in the 118 million figure on the chart there.
Can I just check as a result of that, Colin, obviously the major roads prioritisation programme as well, it's quite tight in what needs to be done too, maybe coming out of that prioritisation programme of work as well. Can you maybe point on that in terms of how tight that is actually going to be?
Yeah, so for 25-26 it's funded, so this year we're fine. Obviously moving lots of things through procurement into construction at the same time creates quite a bulge in terms of the resource that you need, and a number of the city deal projects, for example, have always had shortfalls. So Belfast Rapid Transit is the single biggest shortfall, where the city deal allocated 35 million, but the cost of the project is closer to 150. Those shortfalls have not yet been identified, but we know that the Minister has taken a decision to supplement that a bit in order that we can progress valuable parts of the project. It's not a case of all or nothing being useful. There are things that we can do on that one. Obviously, when it comes to something like a major road scheme, a bypass or whatever, you can't only build part of it. You need to have the funding secured before you take it to the marketplace and ask people to spend time and money bidding for it. There is still a shortfall at a programme level, and that's something that the Minister and the Executive will have to consider going forward.
Anything else in terms
Chair,
of the...
I can take through TransLink. I touched on some of this earlier. Obviously, there's the flagship, the 40 million, so that's the ongoing work around Grand Central Station, Weaver's Cross and Saltwater Square, so that's ongoing this year. There's also 5.9 million ring fence for the Phase 3 Coleraine to Derry, so that's improvements to the line to improve speeds and hopefully better access up to the northwest. There's about 21 million for the enterprise fleet replacement, which is all part of the enterprise fleet replacement project over the next number of years. I touched on things like rail safety, and there's all in all there's about 75 projects around rail safety. Some of the things, as I said before, things like signalling, renewals. An example is Fort William to Bleach Green for one of those. There's projects around bus infrastructure and rail infrastructure. So for bus infrastructure, for example, there's about 43 projects. So in there's things like the real-time customer information as you're standing waiting for the bus. There's also things about just maintaining the buses in terms of washing equipment, etc. And another example, in terms of the rail infrastructure, there's about 36 projects in there. And one would be the Lisburn West, New Halt and Park and Ride. So I suppose that's a flavour of some of the stuff on the TransLink side.
Okay.
From a Northern Ireland Water perspective, so I won't be able to give you detail of specific projects, because they will have to recast their programme in line with their operating plan because of the figure. But as you know, through the price control, their contractually committed programmes are what are targeted alongside their essential maintenance, their nominated output work, non-nominated output work, business critical, and living with water. So that's the framework that they will allocate their funding. And then from a rivers perspective, flood forecasting centre, flood Portadown, Belfast alleviation scheme, and more generally flood alleviation.
Okay. And if you don't mind, I'm going to touch on my favourite subject, rural roads. I had been asking the Minister around whether there would be an allocation or look at ring fencing. Pacific there was before, and a ring fence rural roads pot, and whether that is something that could be again reflected upon any final budget allocations that come. Is that something that would be useful in your view? I'm looking at you, Colin. Is that something that would be useful? I mean, I know it from my point of view, obviously in Fermanagh and South Tyrone, and speaking to my own local team, who I want to say a major thank you to the staff that you do have on the ground. But it is an issue, and even travelling the roads, the main roads are not great. So I'm just wondering, would a rural roads pot actually help deal with some of the problems? Because it is contained within the memorandum about regional balance as well. So how do you do that?
So yeah, you're absolutely right. We've had a rural roads recovery fund for a number of years, and that will ultimately be a decision for the Minister in terms of how that structural maintenance budget would be distributed. That's something that we'll bring her detailed options on once we know what exact number we're able to work with. And look, it very much depends on what your policy goal is. So typically we will prioritise roads that have the most traffic. That's one of the ways that we would prioritise a road, and often that then excludes rural roads. So in order to introduce a degree of appropriate balance and to recognise that it's not good enough to just put, you'd essentially be talking about a lot of the strategic roads and a lot of the roads in and around Belfast where there's more traffic, that would skew the activity in a way that's not desirable from that regional balance perspective. So a rural roads fund and that ability to target money towards the rural network absolutely has a value in ensuring that it's a more balanced offering at the end of the year.
As I said earlier, just this is more of a comment, but as I said earlier, road maintenance also equals road safety. And when you look at the recent figures that were out, and we know driver error is and driver behaviour is a main factor in the causation of road incidences. but rural roads is very high in terms of incidences, seriously injured, and unfortunately deaths. So is that also being considered as part of looking at whether we can ring fence money to ensure it is safe?
Those are all part of the reasons why we would have a rural roads fund, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Look, thank you. We will now move on to June monitoring round. So I know that you have a presentation there as well for it. So I'll let you talk to that.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. I'll just make a start then on the presentation. So I think we've probably covered this first slide here. We've closed off now last year in our 24-25, and we're just reported provisional outturn, and we've already then outlined in relation to the ring-fenced depreciation impairment underspend. We also had a capital underspend. The majority of that related to the A5 due to the legal challenge. As you'd expect, some of that spend then will have shifted as well. Moving on then to the resource budget. So just to set out where we are now in the final budget, our final budget is 637. We did get an increase of about 3.8 million from the draft budget outcome, and that related to, in the main, 2.7 million towards the NICS pay award, and then the 1.2 million for the transforming planning ring fence funding as well. As part of agreeing final budget, the executive also agreed some June monitoring commitments. And we have a commitment then of 4.3 million, and that's towards our increased employers' national insurance costs. And just as a reminder then, our total estimated costs for the increase in employers' national insurance were around 12 million, so we've got a commitment of 4 towards that. In terms of capital then, as I mentioned earlier on then, the final opening budget is 917. Now it is a reduction from draft budget, but the reason for that is due to easements, as we mentioned earlier on the A5 and some of our city and growth deals as well. And we did get an allocation then of 8 million, so we net those off, and we have a small reduction there of 15.7 million. Similarly then, we have commitments that were given as part of June monitoring, a 1 million general commitment, and then 0.4 million, that's for our transformation fund on the urban drainage side for that transformation project. Moving on then for June monitoring, so that was really our starting point that we looked at in terms of what we need to bid for as part of June monitoring. On resource, we've submitted bids of 50 million, and they're all inescapable bids at this stage. So we have submitted our top priority bid to be the roads drainage charge, so that's a charge and the department pays to NI Water for the water that runs off the road, and that's in line with the PC figure as well. Really, that represents the increase from last year, so it's increased in line with fees increasing from the last year's figure, and that's how we get the 1.8. In terms of DVA, then we have a bid of 1.3 million, and that's the element that the department funds, so that's the resource subsidy from the department to DVA in relation to enforcement and licensing activities that DVA carries out. So again, that's just an update from what we had in previously. I mentioned earlier on there that we have a June monitoring commitment of 4 million for the increase in our employers' NIC, and our total estimate was around 12, so we've bid for the balance then of 7.6. The NI Water then bid of 20 million reflects what NI Water currently has set out in its operating plan and budget, and really that reflects the volatilities that NI Water is subject to around power costs and particularly the impact that the weather would have on that as well. So we've bid 20 million, and then for TransLink we've bid 19 million, which reflects the projected cash shortfall at this point in time, and again that will be subject to change as the year progresses. So that's a total of 50 million for our resource bids. Moving on to our capital bids then, we've submitted capital bids of just under 110 million, and we also had a ring-fenced easement on the A5, and again that's due to the legal challenge on the A5. Our top bid there is for increasing wastewater capacity of 50 million. So as Declan mentioned, 350 is the figure for NI Water at the moment. However, NI Water has indicated that what it could spend this year would be 405. So that effectively bridges the gap between 350 and the 400. And really that's to unlock the provision of the capacity constraints, and has the potential to unlock around 7,000 properties if that full bid was met. Our next priority then, as Colin has mentioned, is around our structural maintenance. We have 68 million in the equality scenario, and really what the 29 does, that would bring us up to last year's levels, so that would mean that we could deliver the same level of structural maintenance as per last year. We've also then, the next priority bid is on health and safety, so that's on street lighting columns. So again, we estimate we need around 16 million per annum, and that's a shortfall compared to the equality scenario there, and that's an ongoing programme for replacing street lighting. The next one again, it's a health and safety measure on our local transport safety measures, and that includes 20 miles per hour part-time speed limits at schools, which is in addition to what Minister has already announced, and that's 1.5. We then move on to the fifth priority bid, which is for drinking water for NI Water, which is around 10 million. And then our final two bids are for the A1 Junctions Phase 2, 4.3 million, and then TransLink at the general allocation of 3.5 million. So as I say, that's 110 million submitted in terms of capital bids at this stage in the year for the monitoring round. I've already touched on this earlier on in the previous session. We are currently preparing the report for Minister to consider on the outcome of the Equality Impact Consultation, and we hope to have that with her in the coming weeks. As I mentioned, we've got about 27 responses in, and I've already mentioned and outlined the range of themes that we have coming through as part of that. So that's how we will move it forward, and invite Minister then to take the final opening budget decisions, and at which stage too we're likely to have the outcome of June monitoring, which will help us then mitigate any issues arising as part of the equality consultation. So that's a quick run through the slides. Happy to take questions.
Okay, I suppose the June monitoring, when you're looking at it, it has alarm bells for me, just because all in terms of priority are inescapable. There's no sort of desirable. We're not even bidding for desirable outcomes here. It's all inescapable, and we're talking about big sums of money in terms of inescapable for June monitoring. And in June in monitoring rounds, it is always very competitive in terms of getting funding to the departments. So how bad is it right now for the department that we're in this scenario?
Yeah, so it is challenging for the department. It has been challenging. We did get an increase in our resource budget compared to previous years, but that still doesn't mean that we could do everything that we wanted to deliver, which is why therefore we've submitted the bids as we have. Obviously things like the increased employers NIC, that's a new cost, and if we don't get that met, we would have to try and absorb that within our pay costs already. And for NI Water and TransLink, they are currently working through their operating plans and their budgets as well, to see if there's anything that they can do to try and come closer to the figure that was set out in the equality consultation as well.
So I suppose we have no guarantee at this stage that the department is going to be allocated the 50.1 million for the capital and the 109.9 million for the resource. So I suppose it goes back to my question the last time. The pressures that are identified, yes, they're inescapable, but under each business area, what are you anticipating here? What are you looking that could be cut? Or and it goes back to Keith's point, this will all be seen in the context of outside people's homes. And so people aren't looking at the pie charts of the money behind it, but it is looking it's a pretty worrying picture. So under each business area, what pressures are being identified and what is being considered? What's the contingency plan? Because they're all inescapable.
Sure. Well, I maybe come in first in terms of the TransLink piece in the main, which is the main area of my business area. Yes, it is a very difficult forecast for TransLink for this year, and I suppose last year as well was difficult in that they ended up with an operating loss too. So we have been working closely with TransLink around all of that. The pressures are around cost increases. Susan's already mentioned the national insurance, but you have things like pay in there. You've increases in things like fuel, etc. And also there are other just ongoing sundry cost increases. But we have been having discussions with TransLink around all of that. And linked to that as well, they are trying to tighten their belts as much as they can. So things like recruitment, they're putting freeze on recruitment. To date, it will not affect the PSO level of service, but They did have plans around, for example, maybe increasing some of the frequency of bus services and things like nighttime and weekend services too. So those are all postponed and on hold. And also things like use of fuel, hydrogen, which is one of the new fuels I've been using, is expensive, so they're reducing the use of it, which means they have to rely on the battery or diesel with it. So they're making decisions where they can, and also in terms of just the whole kind of delivery of services around things like cleaning, etc., in bus stations and train stations as well. So, I mean, they're aware of the bleak financial outlook as such, and so we're working with them as much as we can around all of that.
Okay. Roads or
yeah, so
water?
look, from a roads perspective, most of these things, there's only one of the bids is not an area of work that's entirely within our control. So structural maintenance, street lighting and local transport safety measures, if we can't afford to do all the things that we'd like to do, we'll simply not do them. That's the inevitable consequence of that. The one that's slightly different there is bid number 6 within the memo that you've been given on capital around the A1 scheme. When we make vesting orders for a scheme, landowners are entitled to claim a portion of their compensation, but most don't. Most wait until later in the process. So there's a managed risk there around what the actual cash need would be in year, and we're bidding for the balance of that in terms of the difference between the opening allocation and what the final figure might need to be. So again, that's the sort of number that we would manage within the year by simply not doing £4 million worth of other work if that money was needed for the A1 scheme.
Sorry, Declan, before I move on from roads, just kind of talk about the street lighting just for a moment, because it also relates to programme for government in relation to safety and violence against women and girls and active travel and all of that as well. And so the likelihood of being able to fund some of that and what that means for public safety, what that means in, again, rural areas where streetlights haven't been upgraded, and I know that there's urban areas that are the same as well. So what will the backlog, I suppose, mean in terms of service delivery on that as well, if you wouldn't mind touching upon that? Sure.
So I think it's worth clarifying, none of this is about the switch over from sodium bulbs to LED bulbs, so none of this is about upgrading. This is about sustaining the network that we have. So obviously when we see streetlights, we see something that's very beneficial for people in a community, and we also see a live electrical installation in a public accessible area, so we have responsibilities to make sure that that's safe first and foremost. So when a column is either electrically or structurally unsafe, then we must find that in short order, recognise that, pick it up, and then decommission the existing streetlight column. What this money would do is allow us to put a new one back in, as opposed to simply making it all safe and going away. Which would result in a decrease in the amount of street lighting available. So obviously that's not a great thing for communities where that happens, and it's also not something that we're sort of in control of, because the failures come where they come. We're not choosing to decommission areas, we're just unfortunately having to look at, do we have the money to replace that with a new column? And this bid would be important in ensuring that the answer was yes, and as much of it can be usefully spent. There is a significant amount of aged street columns, and some of our street columns are 40 years old. They're not in great condition, as you would expect, and increasingly we're finding that the number that we need to consider replacing is going up, and what we're also finding then is some of the underlying power supply to a group of streetlights also needs to be replaced, and that's even more expensive. And again, if we don't have sufficient funds within our budget for street lighting, then we move to decommission and make safe as opposed to replace, and that would be the impact.
Yeah, okay. Do you not think then, like that invest to save type thing, we're not actually able to do that when it comes to some of these things, and it actually means that when it comes to a very critical stage, we're in that inescapable pressure scenario, which is why you're bidding for inescapables with street lighting, because it's a health and safety concern.
Yes, invest to save only makes sense if you have the money to invest. And on street lighting, for example, we aren't in that place. So there are more street lights that we could convert to the LED bulbs that would reduce the energy bills, and that's a good thing and a sensible thing if you have the money available to invest. We're in a situation where what we're trying to do is figure out how to sustain the existing street lighting footprint and ensure that we don't have to simply take street lights away when they fail or when they're unsafe, and that we can replace them with something that can continue to provide street lighting in a particular area.
And then Declan, water.
Okay, Chair. So we've had a number of conversations with the board of Northern Ireland Water in recent weeks, and unsurprisingly, the pressures that they would be facing should we not be fully funded are there for all to see and present challenges. Particularly so, they're particularly seized with the pressure it will be on their resource budget and the gap that would currently be there. Now, the comfort, if there is any comfort to take from it, is that invariably over recent years there's been a degree of fluctuation in the figures at the start of the year that Northern Ireland Water predicted that they may need, and what ultimately happened at the far side of that year. So, and that's because of the power costs where they do fluctuate, and sometimes they fluctuate to a large degree. And when I mean large degree in recent years, we're talking double digit. So perhaps the power costs will not be as severe as they may be estimated to be at this point, and hopefully that will help. But of course, Northern Ireland Water will also look at a range of other budget heads that it has under its resource budget to look at where it can control spend, and we would expect them to do that as we would expect ourselves to do. So yes, it's going to be a pressure for them on their resource budget. The gap is in around 20 million. We've bid for that. If they don't get it, then it is a pressure. The power costs that are the highest cost are tied to the prospect of the weather conditions over the next year and the related electricity costs that come with that. If the weather isn't as severe as being prepared for, then obviously the costs will be less, and therefore that figure will fluctuate downwards as it has done, thankfully, in recent years.
Can I just check? Something was running through my head there whenever you were chatting, and obviously to do with the power, and we had Stormy Owen.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, is there anything resulting from the likes of Stormy Owen or preparing for future that's a part of what's being bid for as well? Because we seen with NI Water need to get generators into power stations, that type of thing. Has there been any sort of planning or looking at that, which is then resulting from some of the bids that are going in now?
There will always be preparatory work done for it. Thankfully, storms such as the one Owen last year was a rarity, and hopefully it'll continue to be so, and we'll not have ones like that in future years. Northern Ireland Water is more tuned in weather and looking at extreme either wet or dry weather rather than storms. When there are storms, what we typically do is bid towards a pot that becomes available through DOF to cover the emergency costs that should be there. But the power costs are more tuned towards the prospect that the weather might take a turn for the worst in an extreme way, either very wet or very dry, and therefore they're based on that, and that's why they would be as high as they would be if we get a normal year of weather. If there is a normal year of weather in Northern Ireland, then that you would expect that power cost to be less, and indeed, as I say, in recent years that fluctuation has come to pass, and the figure's been much lower.
Okay, I'm going to move to the Deputy Chair now.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks again, folks. When was the last time a full bid monitoring round was granted? Ever?
Can't remember.
The good old days.
Individual bids are sometimes granted in full.
But if you come forward with £109 million worth of resource or capital and 50 odd million, it's highly unlikely, given the competing priorities across the executive, that you're ever going to get anywhere near 100%. That would be fair, and I would imagine every other department's got a plethora of inescapable pressures. And yet one of them, and if it hasn't hit home to anyone watching, and anyone, and you know this better than me, when drinking water infrastructure is an inescapable pressure in a monitoring round, yeah. I think it has to hit home to people the lamentable situation that we're in. So how do you triage inescapable pressures if we're not going to get 100% of funding in this monitoring round? How do you, because it's a massive burden on your shoulders. So that's the first question, as the Chair touched on it. But when you've got pressures like health and safety through street lighting, structural maintenance on roads, drinking water, how do you go about triaging when we don't get that funding? Or do we worry about that as and when we come to it?
Well, I mean, Perhaps I go first, John,
Yeah.
on the water. I mean, we live in hope I mean, let's see
Yeah,
how,
of course.
how the monitoring round goes. But as I'd mentioned earlier, under PC21, there are titles or groups of areas that Northern Ireland Water must look at, and they are contractually committed to essential maintenance, etc. So you would imagine if we didn't get that extra money, then Northern Ireland Water would have to reprioritise, because as you said, drinking water, you would have to. So you would hope, and I know Northern Ireland Water would target the money towards those areas if needs be.
Okay. That's fair. So I suppose back to the other aspects. So I mean, how these are in a scale of priorities, and I'm sure you could have given us a list of 80 or 90 other significant pressures, but not inescapable ones, which you didn't even go near at this stage because you know how tight finances are. So if we got 80% of the proposed 160 million combined between resource, how would you go about doing prioritising inescapable pressures?
We would bring advice to the Minister on what the options are, is the sort of the process answer. But
Yeah.
I think reflecting that wider understanding of public finances and knowing what is a realistic expectation is part of our job, and to use judgment to be ready to respond to a range of different scenarios. So from a roads perspective, we know the areas where the tap can be turned on or off more easily, and you tend to go, if you get a bad monitoring round in October, for sake of argument, and you've only got 5 months left to cope, there are only so many sensible ways that you can dial down your spend to match the budget available, or indeed respond to bids. That's why typically you'll see bigger bids in June than you will in January,
Yes.
because we spend so much between January and March. And it's really just trying to keep all of that in your mind, and using your judgment to bring forward the advice for the Minister so that she has choices.
Okay. Okay, well, I don't envy that task in relation to that, but I think it is a stark reality of just how bad the situation is. The Chair touched on the street lighting issue. Can you give us an indication, Colin, of how significant the backlog is in terms of the refurbishment of the dated schemes? I know that there's 1.45 million, no, 12 million in, for street lighting, but is that the entire, or is that just what you would like to do
That would be
within
what
this?
we would like and could spend sensibly in year.
Okay.
That's what that number would be. The backlog would be larger.
Yes.
I don't have the exact number,
No
I'm afraid,
problem.
in front of me. As I say, we could spend almost as much money as we could find on street lighting columns, and still think that it was a good thing on its own. It's the relative priority of that against all the other things that we're trying to do that becomes a constraining factor.
There are a number of areas, obviously, that didn't get anywhere near inescapable pressures, but might have been funded in the past by monitoring rounds, such as the continued maintenance of grass verges, for example, at junction points, and in the interest of road safety. Are you confident there's still enough budget within the to continue that to a satisfactory degree?
As I say, we're actually moving up on resource budget on essential maintenance, and that's where that would be funded from. So yes, very comfortable, certainly comparing to last year. And then we're in that, well, how good can we get it within the budget that's available, that slightly expanded budget.
No problem. The final one is kind of not related to Jim Monroe, but is related to finance. And if you just indulge me in this one, Declan, you talked about the massive, I think Northern Ireland Water is the biggest consumer of electricity in Northern Ireland. It's a massive amount, and TransLink's the biggest consumer of fuel. And combined, Department of Infrastructure with those entities and itself are massive consumers of fuel and electricity. Has there been attempts made to get benefits of economy of scale by combining the purchasing power in both electricity costs and fuel costs, to combine, as I know TransLink have a significant purchasing power, but do they team up with the department and with NI Water and all those purchasing to try and get better value for money?
Well, TransLink hedge their
Yes,
their
I know
fuel,
where they do,
so I think that's the best arrangement that they can come to
Okay.
in terms of kind of maximising savings and discounts around fuel.
Okay.
Northern Ireland Water's moved to hedging as well.
Has it? Okay.
And we do as well for electricity, and there's a collaborative procurement across the NICS
Okay.
for electricity supply as well. So we do look at ways to bring that bill down, and things like the LED switchover programme were also part of that, where you're trying to need less in the first place. And so yes, that's considered.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose you take money out of the system for 15 years, you're left for what you're left with. And hopefully the committee will support you in the bids. My question is, see on the national insurance stuff, costs, what period is that from? Is that dating back?
This year, so it's
for
from
the start of this year?
Right,
Right,
okay.
okay.
From the 1st of April.
And that's the cost. I suppose one element I'd probably have to go back to the NAW stuff. Can you give us a wee overview where we're at, where you think the bids you're saying, have you confidence in it?
I'm not a politician, so I don't know what decisions the executive will make, Kieran. But we've put the bids in, and we would hope that we would get them. If we don't, as I say, it'll present challenges for Northern Water, particularly on the resource budget, but also on the capital budget. And it'll be a case of, as with colleagues at the table, cutting our cloth. But let's see what comes out of it.
Well, it's just, I'm only going by what there's been a lot of support, obviously, within the committee.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of conversations with the committee, so I'm sure that there's no doubt we will support in the monitoring rounds. I mean, to ensure that,
I think, and I know I would say specifically on Northern Water, but I think if we were to get the 50 million, I think the Minister's plans and intentions of how it can unlock potentially up to 7,000 plus houses, I think that would be a great one. Not that I'm making a bid, but I'm just going to put it out there.
No, I'm only throwing it out there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Andrew?
My question sort of touches on that, if that's okay, Chair. And I think maybe going to, like Mr. Stewart, I'm going to go back. Maybe if you're worried about coming in and June monitor round the last time, and I'm going to maybe go back again. But forgive me in that regard. Just on that, the potential of 7,000 houses, the 50 million bid. I suppose are those 7,000 houses, is it a 4,000 to 3,000 split as such, or is it a different type of split? And then also, is that 7,000 houses sort of dependent on the 90 million, the 40 million coming in the next sort of round of funding? So just questions around that.
So Andrew, just if you can indulge me for 30 seconds to take it back. So. From Christmas, the previous minister and the more recent current minister both been very keen to show the Northern Ireland's open for business, and in light of the programme for government and the housing supply strategy both coming out around the same time and pushing for more housing, we wanted to play our part as a department. So I've been encouraged to work with colleagues in the Department for Communities and the Department for Agriculture, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, Northern Ireland Water and Northern Ireland Housing Executive to look and see if we could plot a way through and look at where, as I describe it, as a Venn diagram of all of our needs can meet in the middle and look at where we could identify potential. In doing that work, and it's been over the last 2 to 3 months, we've identified potentially 7,200 to be precise, properties over the next 2 years that could be unlocked. Now that's not necessarily just housing, that could also mean commercial properties, as you can imagine, and they could be unlocked if there was an injection of around 50 million. I have to say all parties to that conversation, Northern Ireland Water, Northern Ireland Housing Executive and Northern Ireland Environment Agency have really come along with a can-do approach, and therefore if we can get that would unlock, as I say, in total, if you take the 19.5 million that was made available for over 2,000 housing before Christmas, you're talking around about 10,000 properties potentially unlocked there, which is a tenth really of the housing supply strategy. So it's a good news story for Northern Ireland, I think. So this is me almost doing my bid, but what I'm saying is that there is great opportunities there. They're across the region as well, that these housing areas that could be targeted. So over the next 2 years, for 50 million potentially this year and 40 million additional potentially next year, that 90 million could unlock up to 10,000 properties over Northern Ireland. I think that's a good news story for us if we get it.
Thank you, Chair. And then sticking with the NI Water sort of theme. The NI Water overspend was in relation to resource budget. What the officials expect the impact in the NI Water would be again if that resource is not met?
Well, Northern Ireland Water is a non-departmental public body, and therefore, as with all non-departmental bodies, has to live within its budget. So we hope we aren't faced with that position again, and that's the purpose of the forensic accounting report, to look at ways we can work together to make sure that doesn't happen. So while it did happen this year, and it was 1.4 million in the end, we hope that doesn't happen next year, and we'll work very closely. And as I say, we've had regular discussions with Northern Ireland Water on the board in recent weeks, and I think that will continue throughout the year. That's been the kind of discussion we've had. Let's talk more over the next year, and that's what we're going to do.
And there's the part I want to go backwards, maybe, Chair, if you indulge me to try. Just last week there, the Downpatrick flood feasibility study was released, if that makes sense. I'm just wondering, is that bid or is that funding in line with that, or in the last round, or what, or where's the funding for that coming from?
So our Rivers team sits under me. Needs in around 30 million a year. This year needs less than that, but that's because it's worked out its programme of works, and that'll include works such as Downpatrick, etc. So we're not bidding for Rivers for funding. We feel we have enough to do what we need to do this year.
Thank you.
Okay, can I just check? Obviously in terms of your legal contractual obligations that you have, which is why you're bidding for inescapable. I don't naturally I want to see more money and delivery on the ground for these things. But when you're talking about, the 7,000 properties, for example, and that will unlock some of the homes that would be under the housing supply strategy. Can you just maybe point to, what are the legal risks of these bids not being met to the department? Like, you're fully confident in terms of inescapable that it's all legal, contractual that is bid for. So, I mean, there's a issue here where you could be facing court if these bids are not met, and yet we've also discussed the fact that, rarely, never have we seen June monitoring round bids being met. That's huge.
Maybe if I answer from a roads perspective, I expect it'll be very similar for Northern Ireland Water and TransLink and for rivers. So when we enter into a contract for the delivery of resurfacing schemes, for example, that contract has a value. That in itself is not a commitment to pay that amount of money to that contractor, because the process that the contract itself sets out how we commission specific projects, and then when we issue a works order, that becomes the binding agreement between us. So we're comfortable that we can manage that risk at this point in the year, and that's precisely why you can't then necessarily spend out more money later in the year if it comes along later, because you haven't actually lined up the delivery of a specific scheme with a specific contractor and a specific workforce that all have to turn up in real life to do the work. We need the ability to know far enough in advance when to put those works orders out, and at that point we are entering into a binding contractual commitment that when the work is done, we then have to pay it. But at this point in the year, we simply wouldn't issue those works orders, and that's how we would manage that risk if those budgets aren't met, or if those bids aren't met.
So sorry if I'm not clear on that. Does that not mean then it's like a high priority bid rather than inescapable if you haven't actually signed off contracts for the individual capital?
So the contracts are in place and the work programme has been agreed, and it's what we want to deliver. So that makes it an inescapable bid in a public finance perspective. One of the ways we manage that, and don't get me wrong, contractors would rightly be unhappy if we come quite late in the day and cancel planned work programme because they're building their capacity. So there is activity happening to prepare for that. The legal risk is slightly different. It's down to, well, what exactly does the contract say, and we have break clauses and other ways to unwind things that we plan to do if in fact we can't afford to do it, because we don't want to enter into a commitment that we can't stand over.
Okay.
As Colin rightly says, it'll be the same right across the board. But I mean, if you take, for example, in Northern Ireland Water's perspective, you can see, for example, contracts, and you've heard under Living with Water in the Belfast area that probably we've developed a business case to a point, but we can't get to the next stage. And what Northern Ireland Water are sensibly doing in the interim, until and unless we get all the funding, is to look at maintenance of those wastewater treatment works to ensure that they can do all that they can do to manage the situation. So that's what we're having to do. I mean, in and around, I'm picking a figure here, but it is in and around 90% plus of what we do has got a statutory requirement in some shape or form in the department. So the fact that we're not fully funded, you can see that will present problems, and it is about prioritising.
Yeah, I mean, TransLink would be the same around the capital piece. I think the resource piece is more challenging because it's about the financial viability of TransLink as a public corporation. So that's something that I suppose that's the worst case scenario around all of that. But that's why we're working closely with them in terms to try to manage the resource position. And it's all measured against their cash reserves as such. So one thing that we have been doing is front loading cash as well to help with that. And then hopefully their commercial revenue that I talked about earlier in terms of increased passenger journeys will come to offset that as we move through. So we need to closely manage that.
And then Mark, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again to the team for the preparation and presentation of that bid to us. It's scary that when the ink's barely dry on the budget that we're coming in with a bid of this scale, it obviously reflects the need and inescapable. need across the department. Does that reflect, I suppose, how far the budget fell short of the requirements of the department? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but this seems to me like you're kind of setting down a marker for the year. But can you see how these bids might go, or how these bids might grow? Should they be unmet at this stage?
I think certainly the final budget, whilst it was more than the draft budget, it still wouldn't let us deliver everything that we had wanted to. So again, June monitoring does reflect some of that in terms of trying to increase our capacity to spend. We can certainly do more at June than we can later on in the year, as Colin mentioned this earlier on there. If we get this now, we can spend more, but if we don't get it, we're unlikely to be able to spend as much as we work our way through the year and the remainder of the year as well. And as we look towards the spending review, we are going to go back out and ask for requirements over the following years, subsequent years as well, to see how that factors in, how that would look and compare to this year too.
In terms of the spending review, I don't know, anything that comes here as a bar consequential is unhypothecated, but are you aware of any infrastructure related or associated investments that might be announced that we as a committee could and should be pointing to making the argument for ring fencing that for similar spend here?
No, we wouldn't be aware of anything until the statement is announced.
Okay, no, thank you.
Okay, sorry, Keith.
Apologise. I just want to come in, Declan, you mentioned there about, I want to get that clear in my head. The budgetary figure there of increasing wastewater capacity is 50 million, right? This is talking about unlocking new housing.
Unlocking properties, yeah.
Right, so you're aware of the whole fallout yesterday and over this past week or two with respect to the failed nutrient action plan by the Dairy Minister, okay? And obviously the pressure he's put on agriculture. So I suppose the question I'm going to ask you directly, that's for additional, and the Minister for Agriculture wants to reduce livestock in Ireland by X%. Is NI Water going to have to reduce people in Northern Ireland by X% to meet their part? Because this is asking for additional capacity, which I have no issue with broadly. But how are we going to stop the CSOs? How are we going to stop the contribution to the issue of nutrients in their lakes and rivers, which is a massive problem? So I suppose the question I'm asking you, what's the Minister going to do to solve that problem? Because the Dairy Minister wants to reduce livestock. So is the DFI Minister want to reduce people? Because that's the only fundamental solution.
Yeah, as I said earlier, Keith, in thinking our way through this piece of work here and this 50 million bid, we worked very closely with DAERA and DFC, and specifically Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and we will continue to. Indeed, our next meeting is next Tuesday or Wednesday, one of those days next week. So we continue to keep, because there are so many things, the potential withdrawal of Sort B, etc., and the implications that would have. So we need to keep close. We need to make sure we work together, because there's no point heading down a route that then falls foul of all of our requirements, our environmental requirements. So we have to work closely, but they are at the table. They're keeping us right, and we're advising each other.
As DAERA at that table?
DAERA is represented by the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency.
So what's the joint solution then? Because there's one attack in one sector, but I didn't see nothing happening with NI Water.
Yeah, I don't know about attacking. We're certainly.
Well, it is, because it's a simple reduction in livestock. So the solution from an NI Water point of view is reduce the population in Northern Ireland by X.
Well, I mean, we're just...
That's making it very simplistic, but that's what they want to do.
Yeah, we're looking at it from the perspective of what are Northern Ireland Water's commitments under the legislation, particularly around drinking water and et cetera. So we work closely with the Environment Agency on that and honour our requirements.
Every day, Declan, I'm getting videos sent to me of pipes going into rivers and streams with sewage going into it. Every day. And obviously that's heightened with the recent NIA, or the recent DAERA stuff. It's a problem. I think you need to go in and have a conversation with the Minister. What's she going to do about it?
Yeah, I think it would be remiss of me not to come back on that and just to say that the higher percentage is through the farming side.
That's modelled, Declan. That figure 62 is modelled. It's not fact.
I can only go on the expert advice, but
it's a model figure.
But there's in around 20% of it is suggested to be caused by Northern Ireland Water. If we're going on modelling, around about 60% plus is coming from farming. I'm just quoting the figures that have been provided to us. Sorry.
Listen, I've made the point. I think you have the conversation with the Minister, because I think the NAP proposals we're just
Well-
going to destroy agriculture. I think we need to look at reduction in population in Northern Ireland. I think that's the solution, Chair, if we want to get that minute.
Well,
Human population needs to be reduced.
well,
Don't know how we're going to do that, but I'll leave it for
Well,
you.
Chair, the main question for us as a committee, I appreciate what Keith's in is, you know, we as a committee should be supporting bids like this because we need to tackle the pressures, you know, we answer. That's
well,
from a committee point of view.
we will see once the Minister makes the final allocations and decisions on that, and that's where we'll be scrutinising again where decisions have been made and whether that's in line with what is needed as well. But look, appreciate your time today to the committee. And hopefully next time we'll have the information in time for the committee to take a look at. But we appreciate your time and taking us through a run through there of some of the bids that have been made. So thank you. And can I just say, I know I said it, Janet, but I do want to thank the staff that are on the ground because they are doing work in very challenging circumstances, and they are under-resourced, I have to say, but I do want to thank them for the work that they are doing locally in our areas. If you can take that back, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, folks, I really want to move on now, but is there anything that anybody wants to add or check up on just in relation to what we've just heard? No, content for now to move on. Okay.
It's okay back
We will now move on to our active travel briefing. Members, we will be quite tight for time now in this session, so if you could work with me, come to your questions as quickly as possible. Okay, so item 11 is our active travel progress review for 24-25 future plans. At page 159 you'll see the Clerk's memo. At page 162 you'll see Department for Infrastructure active travel briefing paper. We are welcoming to the committee today Colin Hutchinson. He is Director of the A5 Western Transport Corridor and Active Travel Department for Infrastructure. And we're welcoming Peter McParland, Deputy Director for Active Travel Department for Infrastructure. Members, you will see obviously in our briefing pack we do have information there relating to our session. And I know that members are keen to take a look at this, particularly on the back of looking at the budget there and what that means. So, Colin, Peter, you're very welcome to the committee today. We appreciate your time in coming to us, and I'll let you get settled there and get your files opened, a quick turnaround. If you don't mind, I was just saying to the committee, time's tight for us, so if you wouldn't mind briefing the committee for 5 minutes and then I'll come to members' questions if that's okay.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and members. It was probably a year ago that we were up last. I don't know if it's to the day, but pretty close to that. And I think the last time we were up, we were talking about enablers and what we're doing to get the department ready for delivering on the Climate Change Act requirements of the 10%. You've got the briefing paper, which is fairly extensive, giving you a good update on what, or a detailed update on what we've been doing. I'm going to just give a summary of some of that, and also move on to where we are now is on delivery. The focus is on delivery of infrastructure projects on the ground. We'll move on then to the first area. Question that gets asked quite a bit is what is active travel? What's the definition of active travel? And the Climate Change Act didn't define what it was. So the definition which we have published and as part of the consultation exercise, which I'll come to in a second, is basically at its highest level is travelling by physically active means, by walking, wheeling or cycling. And so it covers all pedestrian activity as well as cycling, and includes walking, wheelchair use, pram use, older people with disabilities, as well as all types of cyclists. So that covers some of the most vulnerable road user groups that we have, and we want to ensure that everyone's journey is respected and the infrastructure we provide is accessible and inclusive as possible, and that's at the core of the new design guidance that we have, is accessibility and inclusivity. again, you were asking the last time round, and I think it was asked maybe in 5 different ways what the 10% was, what the transport budget was, so we have done a lot of work on that there, and we've worked through every line of the DFI budgets and identified the transport aspects of that. And whilst it fluctuates every year up and down, the average over the past 3 years is about 850 million. So 10% of that's 85 million. And as an example, last year it was 893 million. So there's an almost 5 million fluctuation in the 10% over that period, which we'll look to balance out as we move forward. We've also looked at not just the brand new shiny infrastructure that we deliver each year, but also what has the department historically done. And again, we touched upon this briefly the last time we were here. There's key activities such as footway maintenance and resurfacing, which is critical to ensure that we not only have new infrastructure, but we maintain the existing infrastructure that we have, with something like 10,000 kilometres of footway and cycleway across the network. We've also street lighting costs, which are also critical in ensuring that we've got safe and attractive active travel infrastructure, and other costs, including maintaining and upgrading pedestrian signalised crossings and other minor pedestrian enhancement measures. And if you take that all together with what I described as the new shiny infrastructure that we're building, that's about £50 million last year, which is about 6% of the 10% of the active travel spend as set out in the Act. Talked about delivery earlier, and as I said, our focus has moved to delivery. We spent about 18 months to 2 years looking at setting the foundations to ensure we had the capacity and the capability of within our teams to deliver what is a big ask of this 10%. We published probably the biggest active travel delivery plan that the department has ever published, and it was out for consultation, and consultation closed in February this year. It identifies 200 kilometres of active travel infrastructure to be delivered in the 10-year period of the plan, with a further 1,000 kilometres beyond that period. We've had 330 responses to that. We're currently giving those consideration, and we'll be bringing recommendations later in the year to the Minister to finalise and to hopefully publish the final version of that plan. Again, on delivery, last year we had 53 schemes across the 4 divisions in various stages of delivery, which delivered 12, and in that particular year we delivered 12 kilometres of new cycleway, footway and shared paths, and the picture's something similar this year. The key point to get across in delivering these schemes is that they do take time. There's a lot of planning, there's a lot of consultation involved with them, and particularly for the bigger schemes, we may have to, through the formal planning process, we may have to carry out environmental impact assessments, we may have to vest land, and all of that takes time. On the BCN, we've set out in the briefing note quite a bit of detail about the schemes that we have delivered. I think I'm not going to go through each of them, but what I would say is that we have a number of schemes at various stages of the legislative process, where we basically have to have legislation in place to ensure that the cycle lanes are not blocked once they're built. And we also have a further 8 schemes that are heading towards various different stages of public consultation later in the year. And what I would say with the BCN is that we said last time round that we're going to try within this financial year to have delivered as far as possible as many of those schemes that are in the short-term section of the Belfast Cycle Network delivery plan, and we're pretty much on schedule to do that. A couple of other areas just to quickly cover. we've set up an active travel support office, which is basically a small number of key consultant staff that are focused solely on active travel activities, developing programs for us, taking the routes that we have identified within the delivery plan and doing a further assessment of those to see, just because we've got a line in a delivery plan that goes from A to B, it starts at A and ends at B, but it could go to C. It could go in various different directions before it gets from A to B. It doesn't necessarily have to take the one route. They do the assessment of what's the most feasible route and then develop a brief which then can be taken to carry out the detailed design. They've carried out about 150 kilometres of that appraisal, over 90 routes since we appointed them. So it's a really positive story from our perspective to give us that resource that we didn't have. I've identified 6 active travel signature schemes within the briefing. There's 6 active travel signature schemes identified. They're 38 kilometres in length. Again, I stressed the last time we talked about having a conveyor belt or a pipeline of schemes coming through as we move through the years, and it's key that we have as many schemes in the system now, because they take a number of years to get to construction, and these big active signature schemes probably will take about 4 years, because they will require public inquiries, vesting of land, potential public inquiries, and have to go through the formal planning process. Again, in the briefing, we've listed some of the key greenway projects which are currently under construction or have been delivered. And again, the couple of points that I just wanted to bring out is we are working closely with councils to develop a strategic, forward-looking 5 to 10 year plan. We're working also with colleagues in the south at cross-border opportunities, how we deliver cross-border greenways, and what other opportunities there are for projects cross-border. And finally, on that point, we did issue grant funding last year of just under £2 million to a number of very good projects. Final topic, and one of
if you don't mind, very briefly, because you're running close to time, Colin.
Yeah, look, I appreciate it. There's lots of stuff going on in the area. The one really important one is the behavioural change projects that we're carrying out. So we've got cycling proficiency scheme, we've got the child pedestrian safety scheme, and we've got the active schools travel scheme, which you heard about Sustrans talking about the last time they were here. I'll not give you the numbers, but they've been really successful over the past year, and they're the foundations to make sure that we're getting children to use active travel, walk and cycle, so that in future we will have more and more people using it through the means of education.
Okay, thank you very much for the information and for the information that you gave to the committee. Just obviously we're coming on the back of having a budget session there, and you may or may not have heard, we were questioning around the visibility of spending to do with active travel, and whether it would be useful to sort of have that as a separate, because we know that there's 10% now needs to be spent on active travel, and so that would be useful to see where the historical spend has been. At the minute we're at 5 to 6% in terms of the budget spend. We need to get to that extra 5%, and yet we're looking at the budget picture today. It's quite bleak. How confident are you, I suppose, that we will reach that 10%, given as well, we don't have multi-year budgets, which allows yourselves to plan for these big capital type projects, which are the same as building a road essentially. You've vesting as part of that as well. And also, I suppose, are you going to reach that 10%, even, and when do you think you'll reach it?
So, as we know, there's no additional money coming to the department as a result of the Climate Change Act. But my task is to get us in the position that we can, and I think we've said publicly by 2030 we expect to be in a position that we have the the pipeline of projects there to be able to do that. That's why we're investing money in design now at the early stages, so that we do have that, in the hope that we do have that availability of that 10% of the transport budget to spend on active travel at that point in time. But you've heard it before. I think 95% of the activities that we carry out within DFA are legislated for, and that will be a challenge that ministers will have to grapple with as to where they prioritise that funding. But we as officials are making sure that we are in a position that we can achieve that, assuming that the budgets are available.
Okay, and then in terms of maybe any work that's being undertaken to link active travel with any emissions, a decrease in emissions, because we've been looking at that recently with transport plans and that type of thing, and we had a very stark graph that was shown in this committee in terms of where we need to get to. So what work is going on there, and not just the department, but I suppose cross-departmentally on that?
So within the department, there's a lot of work we in pulling together what all types of modal shift what impact all types of modal shift will have on reducing carbon footprint. The reality is that getting people onto public transport is going to be much more good on the carbon front than getting people into cycling. If we were to we talk about the percentage of journeys that are under 2 kilometres in length. If we were to get 50% of people switched from a car to those journeys, the amount of carbon reduction is still going to be very, very, very small in the overscale of what the overall relative to the overall amount of carbon that we have to reduce in the 3 carbon budget periods and the 20, 30, 40 and 50 targets. We can provide you with some figures around that there if it would help too.
Yeah, no, that would be good just to see that as well. I just want to say you made a very fundamental mistake today, Colin, Peter. You came to this committee and you haven't referenced Fermanagh and South Tyrone. Now Dungannon Park is there, but I know of a greenway in terms of the Sligo, Leitrim, Enniskillen Greenway, and it's not being touched here. I know that we're at the very starting blocks of that, but surely that's a signature project. You've referenced 6 across Northern Ireland. Yes, there's 6 counties, Fermanagh's one of them, and I would like to see that included, because there is that cross-border nature, huge for tourism in my area, and also if you could touch on what support is actually going to the council in relation to that, because I'm aware that there will be some vesting issues where that sits. Is that going to be council are going to have to vest that land, or will that be DFI?
So that project's a council-led project, like all of the major greenways, and we're working closely with Leitrim Council and Fermanagh and Omagh Council on the delivery of the project, and I think it's in stage 2 at the minute, the preferred route corridor. So at a certain point in the project, there'll be a split, and Fermanagh and Omagh will be delivering the part in the north. But we are working closely with them, and we are identifying their funding requirements in the incoming years to develop the design for that project. So apologies if we missed it out of the briefing, but it's certainly a major project that we are doing, and specifically with respect to the vesting, it's something that a lot of the councils had raised as a concern, and we were looking for pilot projects in different council areas to test different methods of land acquisition, and we had selected Fermanagh and Omagh and that Sligo to Enniskillen Greenway as one that we would investigate using the roads order for the vesting of the land. But What it comes down to is asset ownership and maintenance on completion of the scheme, and that's what we're currently in discussions with the council.
Will that take legislative change then in relation to looking at how that's vested? Because that I'm just worried about delay to the project.
No, it won't require legislative change. The roads order, the definition of a road within the roads order includes roads that you can't drive a car on, so roads that can be used on foot or by pedestrians. That's within the definition of the roads order. So we're confident that we can use the roads order to vest land for a greenway.
Just to add to that and clarify a point, so we can't, legal advice leaving aside legal advice, the roads order is not designed to vest land on behalf of other bodies. It has to be for the department, for an asset that it owns. So we've been encouraging the councils, all the councils, I think pretty much all the councils have the powers to vest, and we understand the difficulties that they have around those. But we've encouraged the councils to use those powers. But we are looking at, basically, as Peter says, to pilot. Is there a way that we can vest the asset, that the department would own that asset, but that the councils would then enter into some sort of maintenance agreement over a long period of time. If we were to overcome that problem completely, where the department could then vest for the purposes of delivering council schemes, that would require a legislative change. But okay. So we're trying to work within the existing barriers or constraints of the legislation to see what we can do.
Yeah, it is just a concern for councils and what that will mean overall for their budgets. It's something that's coming back to myself. But anyway, I'm going to move on. There's lots to ask on this, and I have lots on my list. John.
Colin, Peter, thank you so much for coming along today. We heard earlier on about the massive pressures financially within the department, and every pound is a prisoner. And I do wonder whether you're the envy of the directorates across the department, in that you have a bit more leeway, in that it is ring fenced for you, and at this moment in time unable to spend the money that you've got rather than actually requesting more. With that in mind, when the quest to try and spend this 10%, how do we ensure value for money to ensure that the projects that are being approved and delivered are maximising delivery for the taxpayer?
So that's a really good point, and I'd touched base on part of that the last time that we met, and that all of the enabling work that we've been doing is to try and move away from a scenario that we saw quite a number of years ago, where we were spend money quickly on active travel schemes, and we were picking the low-hanging fruit type schemes at that point in time, whereas now we're taking a much more strategic view on it, and that's where this active travel delivery plan comes into play. So we're focusing the routes within there, routes that connect things. They connect schools, they connect town centres, they connect communities, and those are the routes which will be prioritised, and everything that we do comes with a business case as well. But we have that scoring mechanism to make sure that the routes that we choose tick the boxes that we want them to tick, and those are the obvious areas that we want. So yeah, I'm very confident that we're in a position that every pound that we invest moving forward will be providing the best value for money that we possibly can.
Thanks, Colin. And the chair referred to obviously tracking emissions to quantify the spend versus the lowering of emissions, and I suppose with the quantification in mind as well, how are we tracking the amount of cyclists and pedestrians and the increase of those, and in terms of setting targets, a pound buys us 0.1. Well, you can track it in your watch. Yeah. I don't know if the department's got a massive Garmin to track the entire country, but how do we do that, and how does that progress over time in terms of delivering that value for money in terms of active travel?
So I'll maybe get Peter to touch upon the surveys that carried out now, and I'll maybe just comment then on the overall challenge that does actually bring.
So that in the short term, really what we're talking about when we're developing the network, we need to think about the number of people that can access that network, so we can calculate how many people that we will be providing a choice of how they travel for those shorter everyday journeys. And as Colin said, where does it connect them to? And the level of provision as well is really important, because the quality of the active travel infrastructure has to be
sufficiently high in order for large number of people to feel safe and confident to use it. In the short term, I suppose what we'd say is we will know how many people we are giving a choice to make that shift and change. Something else that you have to remember about active travel journeys, they make up 25% of all journeys made in Northern Ireland, we believe, from surveys. They're currently carbon free, so they don't impact on the carbon reductions because they're already carbon free. So if somebody switches from a car journey to an active travel journey, they're reducing their own carbon footprint. In the big grand scheme of things, compared to changing from internal combustion engines to electric cars, it's not going to move the graph, but everybody can make a difference in their own journey and they can reduce their own carbon footprint. Now, in the longer term, what other evidence tells us that in order to create significant modal shift, you have to have a connected active travel network. So while a single scheme might connect 5,000 people to 2 or 3 destinations, by connecting 2, 3, 4 schemes together within a town and creating a whole connected network, that's where you see the longer term modal shift, and that's where we'll see potentially that's where we'll see the greater uptake of use.
Okay.
Now, it wouldn't be proportionate for us every time we go out to put in a new footway or to put in a cycle track to carry out significant before and after surveys. And with regards to active travel, they're quite weather dependent as well. But what we will be doing in the larger towns, like for example in Belfast, they're going to be setting up, not for active travel, but for the multimodal Eastern Transport Plan stuff, they're going to be setting up a ring of survey points so that longitudinally over a long period of time, we're going to be able to track modal shift in numbers coming into Belfast, and that model could be replicated into other large towns, but it wouldn't be proportionate to calculate or to do before and after surveys on every single scheme.
Thanks, Peter. One more from my chair, very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly, if you don't mind.
Because it ties into my last point about value for money, need, consultation. And as an East Antrim representative, it's not good to say, I think we might know what's coming, and that is the monstrosity that was built along the seafront at White Abbey with a budget from active travel. Now, I know there's progress on this, but I understand it was around £500,000. I've never seen a fence trigger so many people in terms of what is a really nice beauty spot along the seafront. How was that spend justified? And can we get an assurance now that there is some rollback on it, that we will see consultation with councils, local representatives going forward, and also where cycle lanes, and I hope they are, installed along promenades and along our lovely seafront up and down the country, we're not going to see 6-foot walls of mesh all the way along our seafronts, depleting of the beautiful views that we have.
Okay, so my understanding of that one particular scheme was that the council were informed of the upcoming works through the divisional reporting cycle. However, it's probably fair to say that whenever it was actually constructed in front of their eyes, there was a difference in what they perceived.
I think that's fair.
The previous barrier that was there wasn't adequate. It wouldn't have stopped the car. If it had left the thing, it would have ended up in the sea. So whenever you come to replace a barrier, you have to look at the current standards as they sit today. And that was the barrier that was put in, was the barrier that was up to the current standard. Now, I understand the other thing with cyclists is that their centre of gravity is higher than a pedestrian. So that's why a barrier has to be higher if it's beside a cycle track. And then the issue with regards to the grid on the barrier, that's to stop kids. If it didn't have that grid, kids could quite easily step and stairs their way up and over the barrier. So that's the purpose of that. But I understand that they've decided to remove the upper portion of the grid.
Well, I think it's a work in progress, to be honest, Peter, but the reality is, yes, there's going to be some significant rollback on it, I hope. But my fear is that we do have an amazing promenade up and down the country that will see cycle lanes being developed, and no doubt will need the fences that are there replaced. And if the norm that the department is now saying is a 5-foot plus fence with mesh, that's my fear, that first of all, you're going to run a budget in about a week because it's £500,000 to build 100 metres, and secondly, it's a sledgehammer to crack a non-existent nut because the problems you've identified have never happened at that location, and that's my fear.
Your point's made. We're dealing with another with a few others at the moment of projects which are coming that are around the north coast as well, and we want to make sure that they are sympathetic to that environment. We're totally on board, and
we're going to see some progress on it then.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Colin and Peter, for coming in. Firstly, I'm conscious of time. In terms of that definition, I remember when the Assembly was down, we were getting briefings from Colin Woods and Dennis McMahon, and I'm aware that you were exploring the definition at that stage in terms of what is active travel. So I'm just wondering, who did you engage with to come up with that definition, and is that definition now set in stone, or will there be further engagement to gather views from the public and the sector?
It's in the active travel delivery plan as a definition there too. But what we did to the consultation we had at the time that we came up with the word, and we looked at Wales, Scotland, England, and the Republic of Ireland, and they all had very, very similar but slightly different, subtly different definitions, and we tried to simplify, but not lose the message with it. Will we listen to other views? Absolutely. So even though the consultation on the active travel delivery plan, which included that in it, is closed, we're always open to listening to others. But yeah, so we're happy to hear if you've got a view on it.
Lots of views are brought to me, as I'm sure you can imagine, Peter. So in terms of what I heard today about footways and street lights now coming into it, is there a breakdown in comparison between schemes and schemes being delivered? Like how much is spent on schemes, how much is spent on street lights, how much is spent on footways? Because I imagine I'm going to have a couple of calls after this, because I hadn't heard potentially fixing of street lights being mentioned in terms of the definition of active travel. So where does that come from?
So we can provide the breakdown in writing afterwards. But it was looking at, so we'd generally just been reporting on active travel. Well, here's a new scheme. That number goes in there, but we hadn't been actually looking at the wider. Well, what do we already do, and what's essential for active travel? Maintaining existing network is absolutely key. If we don't do that, then the 10,000 kilometres that we have are going to degrade and not be attractive for active travel. Street lighting, and very specifically, one of the primary reasons of having street lighting, particularly in the urban area, is to make the streets safe and attractive. It's not for the cars. It's primarily for pedestrians and making the area feel safe. And moving forward, we've agreed that we will provide street lighting on a lot of the key active travel infrastructure that we build, again to make sure that it can be used in all. At all times of the day, winter and summer.
Okay. And just in my head, does your unit take into consideration, for example, cars parking on footways? Do you look into that as well? Because if you're looking into making sure they're well lit, so they're well used by pedestrians, do you look into cars obstructing footways that that could have creative ideas that could be implemented in terms of making them safer for pedestrians?
So one of the things that we have done, and I mentioned earlier on, and it's what's it takes longer, but it's essential, is to have the legislation in place to ensure that anybody parking on footways, there can be enforcement taken against them, and we work very closely with our parking enforcement team to make sure that we are making sure that we're focusing on those areas. Peter,
just to add to that, so the piece of work that we carried out where we looked at the overall activities within the department, the Climate Change Act talks about the overall transport budget, so that led us to start looking at the overall activities for the benefit of pedestrians and cyclists. And what that drew out is that there are a large number of people right across the department who are carrying out work for the benefit of pedestrians and cyclists. So the Parking Enforcement Unit, who are primarily responsible for inconsiderate parking on footways or illegal parking on footways, those people are, the work that they do, the tickets that they give out to people that are parking illegally is work for the benefit of the pedestrians and cyclists. The road maintenance inspectors who are checking footway defects and things like that, making sure people don't trip, So what I'm trying to say is that our team within the department, who are primarily responsible for the delivery of new active travel projects, although we do take a wider view, there are other significant numbers of staff right across the department and right across the functions of TRAM who are all carrying out work for the benefit. And the piece of work that we've done on the analysis of finances has really drawn out the importance of that to the public and to making sure that people do feel safe and that they have feelings of personal security and stuff when they're out using that network.
And then just lastly, Peter, you'll remember at the all-party group on active travel, propensity to cycle came up. I think, was there some sort of change recently in terms of how the department views that? Or how do you also prioritise routes to make sure that the ones that are going to deliver the most opportunity for active travel are prioritised rather than others?
So Colin mentioned the ATSO, the Active Travel Support Office, and some of the work that they're doing around people, places, provision. The propensity to cycle tool, or the propensity to cycle, feeds into that, because if you have high quality infrastructure that a lot of people can access and it brings them to the places that they want to be, that's what propensity to cycle, and it's not up a massive hill, so it looks at all those things. It looks like things like gradients, the quality of the infrastructure, the number of people, the places it connects them to give us our overall confidence that that route will be beneficial to a large number of people.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the men for coming along. Very good, positive presentation. We don't get too many of them, and what you didn't cover in your presentation, you've covered in a lot of answers. I was going to just expand on a bit around what Peter'd been asking there, and what you've been saying in your answers around, I suppose, the extension of active travel or its definition. I've been asking questions about this for a number of years, but they include things like street lighting. Now, we just got a presentation from the department on their monitoring round bid, and they're bidding for, was it £12 million for street lights? Do you see it as the active travel unit as a risk, or at what stage in the year will someone in DFI or someone in DOF turn around and say, no, you're not getting that off us, go and get it out of the active travel piggy bank?
Mark, I'm not sure that. No, I am sure that that's not something that will happen, because what we're doing with the street lighting element, it's not new funding. That's what say we attribute £5 million of street lighting costs to active travel. That's not coming out of what we traditionally would have been saying our active travel budget is. So if we have an active travel budget of 20 million this year, or 22 million, I think the potential proposal is, that 5 million is actually the money that's already in the street lighting budget that we're attributing towards the 10%, as opposed to new money that we're taking and controlling and putting out. Same with the footway resurfacing or footway repairs. That's money that's already in the section office's budget. But it's been spent on active travel related activities. So yeah, we're not going to be a funder of filling other holes. Albeit we all know that the budgets are tight, and ministers have to make very, very difficult decisions as to where they put the funding.
Yeah, and on that, should we be in year it arises, or let's say evident that there is going to be an underspend in active travel for whatever reason, despite the best efforts of your team and others, given the statutory requirement to ring fence that funding for active travel, what will happen there? Do you know if that money is taken back in, where can it go? Or is there somewhere else in the department that it could be spent potentially? I'm not looking to raid your budget now, but I mean even around road safety and cycling education and things like that, where there have been issues, I suppose, before, or difficulty funding those programmes?
So something I didn't cover in the presentation was that there's been a view that we will never be able to get to the point where we spend 10%. It's just going to take so many projects. I think by 2030 we will be at the point where we're having to make difficult decisions in the active travel space alone as to what projects get prioritised and what projects don't get prioritised, because there's lots of council good greenway projects, there's big flagship projects that we've talked about. There's the projects like the Lagan Bridge, the Strabane Bridge, that all are asking for money out of the active travel budget. So I don't think that we'll be at a point of not being able to spend the money. Like any other programme that we deliver, there will be schemes which will run into problems and will have to be replaced with other schemes. There will be a year that we'll spend a bit less than what we have to, and a year that we'll spend more. But the key is, it's will there be enough money in the budget to provide that 10% to the active travel team to deliver these schemes, whenever you have to then weigh up, making the road network safe, and you don't have enough money to do that as well. And those are the difficult decisions which will have to be made year on year moving forward.
You'll be at the point where there won't be underspend, but we might not be at that point yet. There might not be for another 5 years, and it was just wondering in the interim how we could ensure that money is not lost, the active travel, if it can be, because of the legislation, and how, I suppose, uses a unit. And I know it's quite hypothetical, but I think it is likely to arise, how that could be best spent to promote active travel.
The way it works, Mark, if we did, within the active travel projects budget, if we did identify an easement in year, we have to identify that back into central finance, and then central finance would decide what pressures in other parts of the department that funding would go to. However, the analysis that we've carried out has identified that there are 3 or 4 areas within TRAM where that budget could be reallocated to, and it wouldn't negatively impact on the active travel, the overall active travel spend. So, for example, if I identified an easement, but the section offices had identified that they were carrying out footway resurfacing schemes, and they were putting in tactile paving and dropped curbs that help people in wheelchairs or people in prams to navigate around the streets, that might be somewhere that finance section and a minister might decide to divert that easement into, and it wouldn't negatively impact on the overall spend towards active travel, and it would benefit some of the most vulnerable road users in how they get around the streets.
No, that's good to hear, that sort of reserve list, if you like, already exists, so you aren't clambering around, or the department aren't. But no, thank you.
Okay, Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly. Peter, the Monaghan, the Middletown Greenway, it's not on my list. I mean, I think they're brilliant opportunities, to be honest, especially in the border regions. And I mean, there was great optimism when they talked about that. But just on that, if you have any information on that. But the main question is, a lot of the voicing has been on relation to the timescales and rolling out the schemes, to be honest. And I mean, a lot of people seem good merit on what can we do as as a group, but as the department do, to move these schemes on now. I know the vesting process, I'm very familiar with the planning system and everything else, but for us looking forward now, and we've talked about the budgets and all that, what can we do to move the schemes on, and the opportunities for.
So, Cahill, apologies that we maybe within the briefing it would have helped to provide a greater level of detail on each of the council-led greenway schemes and other active travel activities. So what we can do is, if the committee would wish, we can give a further breakdown of where the projects that we have currently committed to allocating to. With respect to the Monaghan to Middleton Greenway, we are working with the council on that and how to. So southern colleagues are building up to the border, and then there's approximately 2 kilometres to get us from the border into Middletown. So we are working with the council on options for delivery of that.
It's not only active travel, it's cross communities, cross border stuff. There's a bigger part to it than just all that. But, and in terms of how we can move the schemes on and work.
So again, a lot of it will be budget driven. Again, it's back to this point that I made a second ago. We will have more schemes than what the budget will allow for. And it's getting commitment from, in Greenway's perspective, it's getting commitments from the partners there, the councils, that they have got the part funding to take those forward too. And if all of those things fall in place, there's no reason why we can't be on a programme which will deliver them as fast as we possibly can. But
work on the Ulster Canal, especially down there, right, Colin? That's all you got to concentrate. Sure, thanks, Vin. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. A couple of things. See those 6 schemes there that were mentioned, the signature schemes, albeit some of them missed out. just how many kilometres of scheme is that?
I think a total of, between the 6 of them, it's a total of 38 kilometres.
38 kilometres, but then going back to delivery, was it 200 kilometres? You mentioned 200, then you mentioned 1,000. Just
yeah, so the active travel delivery plan, the signatures, so what we're looking for is many different routes of active travel to through design to construction. So the active travel delivery plan looks at primarily at those populations of greater than 5,000, whereas these active travel signature schemes are looking at more connecting those centres together, and there are going to be tourist attractors, there are going to be attractors for lots of different things. So the 200 kilometres that are in the active travel delivery plan are on top of those 6 signature schemes.
Then you mentioned a further 1,000 kilometres that I could pick you up right there, sorry?
The plan itself, the guys couldn't help themselves and restrict it to 10 years, so they've looked at, right, so what could this look like in 20 years or 30 years, and they've identified, Peter talked about, if you can build certain active travel schemes, but there's a point, they connect 2 or 3 locations at a point in time, but if you multiply that by 20 or 30, they start interconnecting everything, and it becomes a really coherent network. And I think that 1,000 kilometres that we're talking about is getting close to that coherent network, which is quite a bit away in the future. The 200 kilometres is the 10-year objective.
Forgive me, maybe it is out there. Is there like you go in these things, everything's an interactive map these days. Is there an interactive map for that somewhere?
The signature project?
Just for the signature, the 200,
active travel delivery
1,000,
plan?
like all those things, is there?
There is for the active travel delivery plan. So if you go onto the department's website, you can go in and look at the interactive map that shows the network plans, for the draft network plans for each of the settlements. Now those, as a result of the public consultation, there's going to be changes to that, because we were very conscious, and that's why we held such a comprehensive public consultation, that the people who live in those towns know best. So our transport planners could take it so far, and then we really valued the views of the local people. So that will make we will make changes to the network plans within the towns to reflect local priorities and things like that. So at the minute, if you go on the department's website and the active travel delivery plan, you'll see the draft network plans for those towns. And what we're going to be doing over time is that we will be digitising through a GIS. We intend to put all of our plans on the GIS, so you'll see how the proposed Greenway plans will connect into the active travel delivery plans when they come into town, and how the active travel delivery plan will intersect with the Belfast Cycling Network delivery plan on the edge of Belfast. So those, but that's the work that we're going to be carrying out going into the future.
And then is there, of those, say, let's call that 1,000 kilometre, how much of that is specific Greenway as opposed to sort of
that the 1,000 kilometres is 1,000 kilometres identified within the active travel delivery plan. Okay, so that's the plan for the towns with a focus on shorter everyday journeys. The Greenways, the number of kilometres within the Greenway network is on top of that again, and then the number of kilometres within the Belfast Cycle Network delivery plan is on top of that again. But all together, those 3 delivery plans all mesh together to create an overall connected network.
And then you mentioned low-hanging fruit being picked off, and that's fine, 100%. I'm thinking back you know, I remember 2016 Minister green light for this, and then, you know, it does seem to have stalled somewhat, if that makes sense. So I mean, I think you referenced this, but I mean, just so, should we expect in the next X amount of years that this is going to ramp up again, or what, or is that the plan? Or
so, whenever I came into post, and I think it was late 2022, and took over the active travel side of things, we changed a lot of things internally, and we recognised that you can't just take a burst of money every year and pick a scheme and spend it on it. You need to have a coherent long-term strategic plan, and that's what the Active Travel Delivery Plan, the BCN, and the Greenways Plan, which, by the way, we will be reviewing the Greenways Plan moving forward. But you have to have that strategic view, and you need to make sure that you've got a mechanism to prioritise within all of those what schemes are going to provide the best value for money that we talked about earlier on. And that's where we're at. As I said, I think all the foundations are now there. We've got all those mechanisms in place, and moving forward, it's delivery on within the budget constraints that we will have.
One more.
Very quick. Yeah.
You mentioned sort of the schemes and whatever to change sort of attitudes amongst children per se. Is there any equivalent schemes, dare I say, for adults? You know, maybe being somewhat, you know, I generally find that whenever I'm cycling, it's the adults that maybe get in your maybe need a bit of a change in attitude sometimes. But, yeah.
There are. So
Right.
the Public Health Agency fund, I think their contractor Sustrans again, on two projects. One's called Leading the Way, and there's another. Leading the Way is essentially working with employers to try to encourage their employees to use active travel to get to work. And then there's another project another program, and the name escapes me, but again, it's Public Health Agency fund thing where they work in communities. So there's certain active travel hubs and things like that, and the work that they carry out within communities to try to encourage different community groups and things like that to active travel. But that's Public Health Agency, it's not the department.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. My question's about, at the start you talked about, Colin, the team you've set up, like a little group. Are they direct DFI employees or are they consultants?
So Peter, you can provide the exact numbers of the internal team. Is it?
We're above 30 now anyway.
Yeah. So, and then we have we had consultants employed to carry out the or develop the Active Travel Delivery Plan, which was published. So that was a unique piece of work. And then we talked about the Active Travel Support Office, and that is a consultant that will be there for the next 4 or 5 years to basically be the tap that we can turn on and off to support our own team. And we're talking about a handful of people there.
There's a core group of 5 people within the Active Travel Support Office, so they're consultant staff that work closely with.
So they have 5 DFI employees?
Sorry, no, 3 days, 5 employees for 3 days per week, working solely for my work on developing the programme of schemes for active
And they're
travel.
DFI employees?
No, sorry.
There's 30 something DFI employees, and then there's 5 from externally sourced.
So if you're going to be ramping up to 10%, let's say you're 6 or 7% at the minute, would it not be more cost effective employing your own people with that expertise if they're out there?
So you've probably heard it here before, just in general, about the challenges that we face recruiting and keeping staff. I think the department's done a fantastic job over the past 12 months to 2 years in increasing the amount of recruitment and promotion that we've had recruiting externally. But with the number of people that's fallen out at the far end and retiring and leaving for other reasons, it's pretty much we've been standing still. I think we've done remarkably well in moving a team which a couple of years ago was a handful of people probably internally to get it to be at the point where we're now looking at a handful of vacancies as opposed to a handful of people that are.
What would that save you, Colin, if you were fit to employ those people directly? You know, let's say a consultant based again a DFI employee. What's that saving in a year, roughly?
I wouldn't have the figures on it, but I can. It's
Thousands.
definitely cheaper to have your own expertise internally, or the majority of the resource internally to deliver internally, and only go external for expert resource that you don't have. But like, this isn't something that's just happened overnight. We've been in this, like I'm in the department 32 or 33 years, and this has been happening for at least 20 years, where we just, government policies over the years have led to that position, and now the market is really the biggest constraint that we have.
It's also fair to say, Keith, that our external consultant partners bring a lot of expertise to the table. So the team that we have within the ATSO were working and are working on schemes in Dublin and Cork and things like that, who are 5 years ahead of us, and we have expertise from the leaders in England and Scotland as well. The people who write the active travel design guides and things like that, that's the expertise that we're able to tap into, by employing those people.
So next question is relating to your let's call it the magic 10% number, right? Where do you see that being as in new schemes based on fixing tarring footpaths, or let's say call them old footpaths? Are you with me? So what's going to be new based with repairing old? What if you're giving me it in percentage terms? What's your magic goal?
Yep. Well, we set out a coherent plan for previous Minister O'Dowd that was primarily based around development of new projects. So it was approximately £30 million of day-to-day spend, and then you would need approximately 50 to 55 million of new capital expenditure every year in order to make that. Now, that new capital expenditure might be capital resurfacing of footways rather than projects. What this piece of work has allowed us to do is that the Minister can make that decision in the future and on a year-to-year basis. But it's fair to say that if we want to encourage more people to mode shift to active travel, then development of new active travel.
Irrespective of what the Minister's going to do in the future, what are you doing today? Like, what are you basically?
It's roughly 30 million.
No, but give me percentage.
So 35. So you're talking about 35-40% would it be of existing things that we do, which are essential to maintain the existing network.
Right, so call it 35-40% based on 60 new stuff.
Yeah.
My concern is, you build new footways are fine, and you maybe heard the comment before, but going nowhere. So I'm not going to name the one around Cookstown, but you're going to spend X amount of money, but it is going nowhere. And you made the point earlier, Peter, but you're not, it's like me building a lovely bathroom and the wife not using the bath.
So I can answer that. I can't specifically comment on the one in Cookstown, for I don't personally know it, but we get the same accusation on a lot of other schemes that are built, and it's what we have to do is think of it in terms of the 10-year or 20-year plan. So what we're doing with this plan is prioritising at the start those routes which will maximise the benefit of number of users on it and opportunities there. But to have this coherent network, we can't build that overnight. It won't appear overnight. I
don't want to cut across you, but I want to bring in this point, and then I'll go back to the chair. It's how you get active travel, the people who use it, right? The numbers, let's say it's a numbers game based on a safety game. So you build a new footpath in Cookstown going X with very little on it, but I can't get a footpath built for children walking to school. And there's a big shout last week about buses and putting flashing lights and all on them. Children can't walk to school because they're walking on roads. The verges aren't being cut and they're laying out an extra metre. The kids is walking an extra metre out in the middle of the road. So they're walking on the road, not on a footpath, because not enough numbers. But it's a complete disaster for child safety. But whenever somebody's knocked down, then it'll be done. And the verges, the grass isn't being cut, which is a road safety issue. So I'm not taking away your job of active travel. You want to get people walking on numbers, which is fair enough. But there has to be a balance between numbers and safety and bringing it all together. And numbers can't be the pure ultimate goal.
Yeah, totally get that, and particularly in rural areas, it applies differently to it. I'd be happy to hear more about that particular case.
And I want to finish on this point. If this legislation comes about buses, this isn't going to be a simple thing of the bus stops and the wee arm drops down. There'll be specific drop-off points for kids. What's that going to mean? More kids is walking till then. Yeah. So it's going to have a bigger issue.
One of the core things for us is providing good quality active travel alternatives to schools. So speak to us about that particular case.
I could spend the day with it also, because you haven't mentioned it in your paperwork either, but we'll leave that there. Chair.
You don't want to be building anything to nowhere anywhere, over in Mid-Ulster, kid.
No, just for Man on South Tyrone. But look, thank you very much for your time today. There was just one thing I wanted to check up on. We did obviously have Sustrans up here to the committee, and obviously they do an awful lot of work in terms of schools. I've been out seeing it even in local schools that I have. The work that Sustrans do. One of the things that they said was obviously they have to bid in for funding in terms of the education piece that they do around schools and that type of thing. Could there be a case where they could actually be just given core funding to do that work, just straight out the bat?
Not within current legislation. So within current legislation, our department has the powers to provide grant funding to local councils only. So our department doesn't have the power to give grant funding just to one charity. So that's why we have a competition, and Sustrans have been successful on a number of occasions year after year at that competition, but it is still a contract that they then fulfill.
Okay. There's lots more we could have discussed today, and we just don't have time. But I think there are a couple of things that you were going to come back to, son. I think I noted around the modelling of the emissions type stuff. I think there was maybe a wee piece just we chatted about that you said that you might come back to committee on, and then obviously the council-led greenways, just to give us a wee bit more of a breakdown on that.
And one thing I would say, Chair, you won't see Sligo and Enniskillen on it now because they didn't bid for any money last time, but we're working with them actively to work out how much they do need to bring that project
after your
through
request today, Chair, they're working on it.
Don't worry, Peter and Colin, you'll be hearing a lot more from me on that one. But look, thank you very much for your time. We do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, gents.
Okay, members, we have literally about 5 minutes here. We've a few quick things just to do. I just wanted to check, is there any information or anything that anybody wants to take forward or query further on coming out of that? Deputy Chair, I see your calls going there.
Or the Chair, sorry, they're going to update us on our projects, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
It'll be good to get a prioritisation method. Peter touched on that. It'll be good to understand how they prioritise a scheme.
Yeah, we can check.
Well, that's rural wide or numbers, and I know it's not a numbers game, but how do they work out? That's a good one to do.
Yeah.
In simple language.
Check up on that, okay. Okay, thank you. I'm now going to move on then. So item 12 is written evidence. It's assembly research on planning and flood risk. And I just wanted to check if people were content to note, or if there was anything coming out of that they wanted to further query.
Happy to note, Chair.
Happy to note, thank you. Okay, item 13 is a forward work programme. So you'll see at page 272, draft forward work programme. There on the pack. I think there may be a few changes to that, perhaps.
Yes, next week you'll see September and bits of October populated for your approval.
Yeah. Thanks. So we'll be looking forward to that.
Football season will start at that time, Johnny. But
there might be a lot more starting in that season. Look, I'm just seeking agreement that we proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in your all content. Yeah. Okay. Any other business? Is any members of any other items of business that they want to raise at this moment in time? No. Okay. Look, thank you, folks. Date, time, location of our next meeting, as you will be aware, is the 18th of June at 10 a.m. here in room 29, Parliament Buildings. Thank you, everybody, for getting through that session. I now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.